Hello, 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 folks. How are we doing? I hope everybody's having a great weekend. We are going to get started here in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. I will see you all soon. Hello, Aslan. How are you? Welcome, welcome, everybody. Oh my goodness. So many folks popping in. Early birds. Good to see you all. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. Hey, Oakleus. Welcome in, everybody. Hey, Copper Lily. Welcome, all you early birds. We're going to get started here in less than a minute. While we're getting started here, can everybody hear me okay? Are my volume levels all right on my microphone? Hey, Chempo. Perfect. Hey, Oxmarto. Alrighty. The timer has counted down, so it is time to get started. Welcome, everyone. How are you? I hope everybody's having a great day today. Looks like I accidentally disabled my cool animated transition. That's all right. I'll put it back. Thank you, Candy Pants. Good to see you. Oh, Aslan, you're converting the restaurant template to suit your first ever client. Oh, that's amazing. I really do like that template. That was a really fun template to build, and it's a fantastic static site. You can hook it up to a backend, or you could leave it static, and it works great either way. So I really like that one. I'm glad you're getting some use out of it. Ads with Christmas carols. Oh no. I am curious, folks. Welcome in, everybody. How often do you guys always get pre-roll ads before my stream starts, like during the intro? How often do y'all get ads during my stream if you're not subscribed? Hey, Kalares, good to see ya. Hey, Renitz. Hey, Chris. Welcome, folks. Okay, this is the first time you have gotten an ad before the stream. During the stream, you never get them. Okay, good. Yeah, I have ads turned down literally as low as Twitch will let me go. Of course, being Twitch, I can't disable ads entirely like I can on YouTube, but I do have them turned down all the way. So hopefully it's not too bad. Oh, Seiwan, that's awesome. You hosted on Cyclic for backend. Very cool. Hey, Fuel. Dev Limiter, you got a Red Bull ad when you joined today. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Your full stack project. That's awesome. Way to go, Seiwan. Okay. Yeah, awesome. I can't wait to check it out. So what are we doing today? Well, today we are doing something a little bit different than really any of the projects we've done in the past. Today we're going to learn about Visual Studio. Now, this is not VS Code. This is not, so what we normally use is VS Code, right? It looks like this. You know, it's zoomed way out because this is how I normally code with it. But we're used to using VS Code. Today, I wanted to introduce you all to Visual Studio, which is something slightly different. This is Visual Studio. It is a Microsoft product, and it's free, which is pretty nice. Visual Studio is what's called an IDE, which is an integrated development environment. And what it does is it allows you to both develop and deploy applications from inside the software itself. So, for example, if we wanted to, let's say, develop a Windows application, like a desktop application, rather than a web app, we could develop it inside of Visual Studio, code the entire thing, code the user interface, test it out, do all the debugging, everything like that, and then literally publish it and allow people to download it and install it using nothing but Visual Studio. Now, do you have to use Visual Studio? No, you do not. Absolutely not. Don't get it twisted. Visual Studio is not required for you to be a developer, but we're going to talk about it today. But because Visual Studio is something you'll probably encounter if you ever end up working for a corporate employer of some kind, especially maybe a larger employer, they're probably going to be using Visual Studio in some capacity, especially for building, let's say, internal applications. And so today we're just going to do a quick run through. Microsoft has a lot of wonderful resources for Visual Studio. And what we're going to do is we are going to build a Windows application, like a desktop application, not a web app, but we're going to build a desktop Windows application and we're going to run it. Actually, in fact, I'm going to show it to you right now, what we're going to build today. Here's my application. It's very simple, but you can see it's very clearly a Windows desktop application, just like any other application you've ever used on Windows. Oh, captions. Yes. I think I have captions turned on. Can you all see captions if you need them? For those who normally use captions, I just want to make sure they're running. Can you see captions right now? I did turn them on, but I want to make sure they didn't turn themselves off. All right, just let me know. Oh, caption my caption. And also, by the way, if you do want or need captions, you can hover your mouse over the right side of your viewing window, where you're viewing my face right now. Hover over the right side, like kind of above me here, and you can click the closed caption icon in order to see captions generated on screen. You don't see them on. Okay, let me, because I did turn them on, but sometimes they don't always like to play nice. Let me do this. All right, test. Oh, here we go. They stop themselves. Yep. Test, 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 test. Are captions on? Yes, they should be on now. Okay. Sometimes if I don't have them in a separate tab, they don't play nice. So there you go. That should be fixed now. Sorry about that. Yeah, Chet Dev, it should be on the right side of your viewing window. If you hover your mouse, you should get a little pop-up that shows the CC icon in the right side of the window. Awesome. Dev Limiter says, can we download Visual Studio Community on Mac? You should be able to. I believe there is a Macintosh option as well. It's built slightly differently than the Windows option, but it does still work. And so what this application does that we're going to build today is it's very simple, just basic CRUD. You can add a name to a list, like so. You can click on a name and delete it, or you can double click on a name and edit it, like so. So very simple operation, but this is less about building the application itself and more about introducing you to VS Code. Thank you for the follow, Mark Tizzy. Good to have you here. Oh, VS for Mac was Sunset. No, so Fuel Snowball, there is an option. I know there is. We can look at we'll look at the download page and we'll see. Hey, USMC, good to see you again. I thought there was. That's so weird. Okay, well, let's take a look. But anyway, what is Visual Studio? So again, Visual Studio is an integrated development environment. It's often used in corporations. However, it is free for individuals. You can develop free and or paid apps. So apps that people pay you for. You can develop them as long as you're an individual. You can develop them in Visual Studio for free. You can develop really in any language in Visual Studio. You can build Windows apps, you can build Linux apps, you can build .NET, you can build web apps, anything you want, you can build it. Now you might say, well, why the heck would I use Visual Studio? Like, what's the real difference between Visual Studio and VS Code? Well, VS Code at its heart is really just a really fancy version of like a text editor. At its basic purpose, that's what Visual Studio is. It's a very fancy version of a text editor. Now, can it do more? Yes, absolutely. But you usually have to download extensions, you have to install packages, you have to install extras in order to make it do more things than just being able to write and edit code. Now, Visual Studio has those things built in for the most part, including publishing, doing things like document signing, that kind of thing. It's all built into Visual Studio. Yeah, and absolutely. Theo Snabble says, I use both VS Code and VS. I do too. Absolutely. Yes. So, what do I use VS Code for? Well, if I'm building web applications, like what we normally do here on stream, I think that VS Code is excellent at that. It's streamlined. You can configure it to build your applications exactly the way you want, push to GitHub. It's super fast. It's great. But for work recently, I've had the opportunity to build some desktop applications for certain utility things that we do, that my development team does to try to automate some processes, to automate some tasks that were previously manually done. And for that, we can't really use web applications; they have to be desktop. So I have found Visual Studio to be great for building desktop Windows applications and then deploying them to a file share and making it so people can install them. Just they go out to the LAN, they go out to the network drive, they click a setup file, it installs on their machine, and bam, they're good to go. They're running the app. VS Code is like a light version for lighter coding, I think. It depends. You can actually do a lot of things, pretty heavy duty things with VS Code, but for really bundling the whole package together for developing desktop applications, I think Visual Studio is better for that. But it's the right tool for the right job, right? And so today we're just going to introduce Visual Studio, show some of the things it can do, and we're going to build an application by following an excellent tutorial from Microsoft. Um, so I don't want to build something really complex today since this is a brand new tool. We're just going to follow a tutorial from Microsoft and we're going to build an application. And here's the kicker. We're going to build it in C sharp. Now you might say, oh no, I've never used C sharp before in my life. It's okay. What you'll find is that C sharp has a very familiar appearance. It's okay, Chet. What you'll find is that C sharp has a very familiar appearance to a language you already know very well, which is JavaScript, because they're both based on the programming language C as far as the syntax, as far as the way you write it. So what you'll see is some, no pun intended, what you'll see is some very familiar ways of writing things. You'll see us using functions. Yeah, it's gonna look pretty familiar in the end. Exactly, Gubrick. Always use the correct tool that will help you solve the problem. Sometimes that may be AI, certainly. Drunk Uncle Grandma says, I only use Visual Studio to test how quickly I can burn a hole through my CPU. Yes. One other thing about Visual Studio is it is very much a resource hog. It's much heavier than VS Code. So that's why I'm going to tell you right now that you do not have to install Visual Studio. You do not have to code along with me today. If you are on a lightweight computer, if you're on an older computer or anything like that, and you don't want to fill it up with multiple gigabytes of a new installation, then you do not have to code along with me today. It's not a requirement. This is more of an introduction to a tool. Feel free to just watch along and watch how we do things. That's perfectly fine. Hey, Leo, good to see you. All right, just catching up on chat here. Yes, as Dev Liviner says, so many things in JavaScript come from C. You're absolutely correct. Yes. All right, so I'm going to stop this application, but yes, again, this is a standalone Windows desktop application. It has nothing to do with your browser at all. It is not a web app. It is a desktop application. And some of the applications that I've built for work, they run exactly like that. You install it, it's in install it in your program files, or it's on your start menu, and you launch it like a standalone application. So pretty cool. Let's stop this for now, and let's head over to the Visual Studio website for Visual Studio Community. I'll paste this in chat if you want to check this out. Again, you do not have to install Visual Studio today. You can just take a look at it and follow along with us. There you go. Spam it a couple more times. Phil says, I find VS more capable of handling large C# projects than VS Code. Yeah, it just depends. Once you know JavaScript, most of the languages are so similar. Yeah, so once you know JavaScript, that's why JavaScript is a great language to start with. Is once you know JavaScript, really any other C syntax language is going to look really familiar. You're going to start to just notice the curly brackets and be like, "Hey, I can do this." Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for the sub, Copper Lily. I appreciate that. Since my alerts are so broken, I did something, I made a custom thing. So here you go, Copper Lily. Thanks so much for subscribing. You're very cool. Thank you, Copper Lily. So because Twitch alerts wouldn't work, I just, I made my own. My laptop thanks you for that. Yeah, not a requirement today. My laptop fans goes crazy when I start VS. Yes, it is very much a resource hog. So really, you should only use it if you really need it to do something. All right. So here is the website for VS Code, or sorry, for Visual Studio. You can check out the information about it here. Note that there are some limits on usage. However, for individuals, you can use it to do pretty much whatever you want. Create your own free or paid apps. It's all good and it's free. So no limitations on that for you. You can also give it any kind of license that you want when you deploy it. So like, for example, the MIT license for open source, you can assign specific licenses to your stuff. But for most corporations or employers, you're probably going to be using Visual Studio Professional or Enterprise. But individuals can use the community version, which is free. So if you head on over to the download page, they have a bunch of good information there. You click on download it should download it for you. Um, 4 or 5 IDs installed. And they have a ton of tutorials here. We're going to follow one of those tutorials today. We're going to be following the Windows desktop app tutorial with .NET Core. We're going to be following this tutorial here. And if you look at the automated postings that Moobot is doing there in chat, it links you to the tutorial. The tutorial is the second link there from Moobot's posts. If you need the tutorial or the finished code at any point, you can do !project in chat. And it'll give you both of those links to follow along with us. But you can see there's a bunch of tutorials here. So however you like to develop, if you want to build a Node.js app, you want to build a TypeScript app, machine learning, game development with Unity, ASP.NET, Python, you want to do data analytics, really anything you want. Now, if you're installing Visual Studio right now, you might notice that it's going to give you a bunch of packages to choose from. The more packages you select, the more space it will take up on your computer. I think for like a maximum of like 42 gigabytes if you select everything, maybe even more than that, I'm not sure. So if you want to just do the lightweight installation to follow along today, you can just choose the .NET development kit. Just select that only, and that'll be a fairly lightweight installation. I say fairly, but yeah. You're waiting for your Google for a Google IDE? Do they have one now, or are you waiting on one? And real quick, I'm just going to Google Studio for Mac. Here we go. So there is a Visual Studio for Mac. Let's see if it's free. If someone's on a Mac, oh, retiring on August 31st, 2024. That's lame. But if you want to install it now, I guess you can. Here's the link for those who are Macs. Give it a try. It doesn't say explicitly whether or not it's free, but at least it's something. VS Code for Mac is free. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that, DFDX. So yes, Visual Studio is free on Mac. I shared the link there in chat. Please check it out. I've downloaded the setup file twice now. Okay, so maybe some performance issues on Mac. Yeah, Microsoft, as expected, is very Windows focused. So yeah. Classic Microsoft, yeah. Well, I do gotta say, it's a pretty bro move by Microsoft to make this full featured IDE completely free for individuals, right? There is no feature limitations here. There's nothing behind a paywall. It is actually the same thing you would be using in a corporate environment, except free for individuals. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, they are pretty rad. Yeah, as far as free stuff, GitHub, you know, Visual Studio, all that stuff. It's pretty cool. I gotta say. Yeah. Okay. What? Yeah, I remember reading that. Xamarin Mac is just the Mac version is just Xamarin. It's pretty nice. Okay, I've been vamping here a little bit to give folks maybe a chance to start downloading and installing it if they want to. Again, you only really need the .NET kit for today, but we'll move on here a little bit. Again, all we're just literally going to be following Microsoft tutorial today, so you could do this anytime on your own time, whenever you want. We're just going to follow exactly what Microsoft spells out in this tutorial. Um, and I'm actually going to just grab the link here from Mubot. So this is the tutorial we're going to be following today. Creating a new a new WPF app with .NET. Now, some of these things might be unfamiliar, such as what is WPF and what is .NET. Yeah, so basically .NET, excuse me, .NET is the framework that Microsoft developed to basically help you develop stuff. It's a development framework. .NET comes built into or comes installed with most Windows implementations, and you can download it yourself. You can download different versions, and it serves as a framework just for application development. Catching up here again, and WPF is stands for Windows Presentation Format. So what that is, it's basically just the GUI for the application. So if we were to look at the finished version of the app here, all this stuff that you see on the screen, this is not C#. This is what's called WPF. It's written in something called XAML. So don't worry, we'll talk about that a little bit more coming up. But Windows presentation format is basically how you can build a GUI or a user interface, a graphical user interface for your application. There's another type of front end that you might see on applications called WinForms, which is basically like the classic Windows 95 look or Windows 98 look for applications. Um, that classic Windows, pop-up box kind of a look. You'll see that often on applications as well. That's actually how I build the internal applications for work. I use WinForms instead, just for uniformity across all of our internal tools. But today, this tutorial we're going to be using is going to use Windows presentation format to help us build our user interface. Okay. Hustler says, isn't that Visual Studio for C++ or C# developer? It is. We're going to be building something in C# today. But don't panic if you don't know C#. It's very similar to JavaScript, I think you'll find. So stick with me. Trust me on this. I figured VS Code is loved by all, so why maintain 3 IDEs? Yeah, that's probably why. They'll just took it down to VS Code and then Visual Studio for Windows. Gerbic says, can I install Visual Studio on Ubuntu Linux? My laptop only has Ubuntu. I don't know. I'm curious, is anybody else out there using Linux? I'm not sure if that's possible or not. I think I've seen it installed on Linux, but I don't know the answer to that. Interesting how many OSs people use. Yeah, there's quite a few out there. Yes, WPF is also locked to Windows, correct. Ooh, thank you for the stretch there. And thank you for the follow. Thank you, Johnny. To have you here. Oh, Dev, it's not even letting you. It said it's not retired until 2024. That's weird. Okay. Well, please do follow along. Thank you, Mavi. Oh, darn it. Okay. Yeah. Well, please do stick around and follow along. If you ever, are employed by someplace that's using a Windows environment, it's nice. It'll be nice if you're familiar with the basic layout and how to use it. No VS for Linux now. Yeah, so that's again why VS Code can be really it's a bit more flexible, cross-platform, that type of thing. What I find kind of ironic is that you can use Visual Studio to develop cross-platform apps. Like I can use Visual Studio and develop an app for Mac or Linux right now, but you can't run Visual Studio on Mac or Linux. I think that's really funny. All right. So if you did manage to install Visual Studio on Windows, I'm actually going to go ahead and open a brand new window so we can kind of start from the beginning here. And again, we're going to be following this tutorial right here. If you need a link to it, do exclamation point project in chat right now. Exclamation point project, it has a link to this tutorial. So in this tutorial, we're going to create a Windows presentation foundation. I always say format but it actually stands for Windows Presentation Foundation, which I'm like, that's weird. Like, why isn't it format? So in my mind, the F stands for format, and you're all just going to have to live with that. But we're going to create a Windows Presentation Foundation app with Visual Studio. Once the initial app has been generated, you'll learn how to add controls and how to handle events. That sounds familiar, right? We know what event handlers and event listeners are. We've done that before. Maybe it's not so strange. By the end of this tutorial, you'll have a simple app that adds names to a list box. Oh, Mavi says you can use Fiddle online if you can't install Visual Studio. Okay, very good to know. Thank you, Mavi. So we're going to learn how to create a new WPF app, add controls to a form, handle control events, and then run the app. And this is the app we're going to build. You've already seen it. So the prerequisites are really just install VS Visual Studio 2022, which is what you'll install right now if you've just downloaded it. And now let's start at the very beginning. So I'm going to pull this over on my other screen. But once again, you can pull up the tutorial from the link from Moobot and follow along yourself. But we're going to go step by step. So I'm going to open up here and I'm going to open a new window here. And I'm going to minimize the finished version. Well, actually, I'm going to wait until you managed to install via, okay, Avalonia works, cool. All right. I'm glad there's a alternative. All right, so the first thing we're going to do here is when you first open Visual Studio 2022, it's going to give you several options. So you can clone a repository, kind of like in VS Code. You can clone a repository. You can open an existing project. Oh, Orblets, thank you so much for the follow. I appreciate it. You can open a local folder, or you can create a new project. We are going to create a new project today. Digging out Windows machine. Oh my goodness. Again, Copperly, you don't have to follow along if it's going to be too much trouble. Don't worry about it. This is not something that you're probably going to use every day. Only if you want to use, really, only if you want to build Windows applications, or if you get a job that that uses Visual Studio. So don't fret if you aren't able to follow along. But I appreciate the effort. All right, so we're going to create a new project, and it's going to bring up this other window here that gives you a ton of options. You're gonna be spoiled for choice here. Gives you a whole list of the types of things you can build with Visual Studio. Orblitz, welcome to the stream. They're currently working through the Microsoft Free Code Camp C# Foundations project. So coming across your stream now is quite the coincidence. Oh yeah, that's a great coincidence. It's great to have you here. So we're going to be using .NET Core today instead of .NET Foundation. But yeah, wait, it found what's the other one? .NET Core, and what's the other one? I'm spacing right now. I just used it and I can't think of what it is. But yeah, there's other stuff. No. So we're going to create a new project. Oh, framework. What did I say? Yeah, why did I say foundation? So you can do either .NET Core or .NET Framework. But don't trouble yourself too much with the differences between those. We're going to be building something in .NET Core today. So we're going to create a new project. And in the search for template, yeah, right. In the search for template box, we're going to type WPF. Oh, my alert worked. Hooray. Thank you so much for the resubscribed, Icefire. My goodness. Good afternoon, coders, indeed. Thank you so much. And I'm going to give you my new little thank you. Thanks. You're so cool. Thanks so much for subscribing. Kari says, no, so are you going to make a backend? Not today. We're just really introducing the concept of Visual Studio. We're not doing anything crazy today because Visual Studio is a brand new tool for everybody here, or for most people here. And so we're just going to make a simple desktop application today. But we have, if you're interested in building a backend, I have a lot of other projects on my channel. You can do exclamation point YouTube. It's for my YouTube channel. I have a ton of other projects there, like almost 2 years of, at this point, of full stack projects that you can choose from. All right. So we've typed WPF, and you can see there's a lot of choices here under WPF for what to choose from. And what we're going to choose is filter down to C sharp, because that's the language we're going to be writing in today. We're going to choose C sharp, and then we're going to choose WPF application. Now, the tutorial notes do not select WPF application.NET framework. You want to just select this one here that just says WPF application. So .NET Core and .NET Framework are two different things. So make sure you're choosing this one and not this one, so you can see the difference. We want to choose this one right here. All right. Yes, Renitz, you should be able to follow along. You'll probably have to pick a different, if you have Visual Studio 2000 or 2019 or an older version of Visual Studio installed on your machine, you should be able to follow along, but you'll have to pick an older version of .NET when we get to that point. That's okay. For this, it's probably not going to matter. Yes, Icefire says, oh, actual Visual Studio, not VS Code. Yeah, we're using Visual Studio today, not VS Code. There is a difference. So we're going to pick this one right here, this first option. And you can now the next thing you can do is you can give your project a name. So I'm going to call mine names2 because I already built this once. And I'm just going to save it in the default location, but you can choose a specific location on your computer where you want to save these things. Some folks, and I know, have a specific folder for my stuff. So put it wherever you want, just browse to the location and save it there. And then you'll also click this checkbox right here for place solution and project in the same directory. That's just going to put all your files in one place. So pick wherever you want it to go, give it a name, and then put both the solution and project in the same directory. Kareem says, Visual Studio looks intimidating to me as a developer who uses VS Code all the time. It used to look intimidating to me as well. I've really only started using it heavily fairly recently to build Windows desktop applications. And it gets much easier with a little practice and exposure, which is why I'm exposing you guys to it today, to try to make it a little easier and a little less intimidating. But it's really has a lot of similarities with VS Code once you kind of get the feel for it a little bit. Yeah. Icefire says installing the free community one. Yep, that's what we did. That's what we did a little bit earlier. The newest version of Visual Studio is free, the community edition. We're going to be making it with C sharp today, Kareem. Yeah, the installation does take forever. I totally get that, which is why we're operating off of a tutorial today, so that if you do get behind, you can just follow the tutorial and catch up. Because yeah, installation takes a long time. It's a big piece of software, which is why I'm not making it mandatory that you install it today. Yeah, don't install everything. Just install the .NET package. Otherwise, you're going to be taking up like 50 gigs of space on your hard drive, which nobody wants that. All right. So we've given it a name. Then we'll click next. Now this next page here is where you select your framework. And really, this is just the version of .NET that you're going to use, the version that you're going to develop this application on. If you click the drop down here, you'll notice that there's really only two options. If you're using an older version of Visual Studio, you might see like .NET 5 and .NET 3 listed here instead. It's okay. Just pick whichever the most recent one that's available to you. We're going to pick .NET 7. Oh, and Mavi is sharing a link there. If you are unable to install Visual Studio, use the link that Mavi has shared. Use .NET which is a browser-based version of where you can code in .NET. So thank you so much for sharing that, Mavi. I really appreciate it. Exactly. All new IDEs can feel like that. They can feel unfamiliar. They can feel strange. Just keep using it. You'll get more comfortable as you use it more. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. USMC, are you saying you can or can't see the link that Mavi posted? I just want to confirm. Can't? Okay, let me post it. It should let me do it. Because it shows up for me, but I wasn't sure about that. All right. For anybody on Mac, can you see that link? I just spammed it 3 times in chat. Hopefully that worked. Okay, good. Yeah, let me do it. I figure it would. All right. So we've chosen .NET. Okay, perfect, Icefire. That's it. Yep. So we've chosen .NET 7.0. I'm going to say create. Yeah, mine get posted. I figured they would. And then we're going to create it. And what that's going to do is it's going to take us to the main page for actually doing our development work. So we'll create. I'm going to initialize the project for us. All right. And what it's spinning up right now is essentially a live look at how like a visual representation of our GUI. So you know how when you are developing, you might use NodeMon or something like that, and you'll have a browser window open on one side of your screen and then VS Code open on the other. And then as you're working, you'll use NodeMon to do constant refreshes and see how your page looks while you're, adding CSS or HTML or whatever. This is essentially doing that, but inside of Visual Studio. So it's as you change the code, it's essentially going to show you what that's going to look like in the application. All right. Now, this is essentially the basic of how the window looks. Up top is our GUI, and then down below is the sort of the styling information for our GUI. So in the tutorial, it kind of describes a little bit about what the various elements on your screen are. In this, there we go. So there's a part that's behind the chat window right now. I'm going to move it over a little bit. All right. So item 1 is the Solution Explorer. So this shows you all the parts of your project. So we can see that our project right here is called names2. And then we have a file called, we have some dependencies. We can ignore that for now. We have a file called app.xaml. Yeah, I know it's a big installation. I know. We have a file called app.xaml. Now, XAML is probably something that you haven't seen before, but it might remind you of something like XML. How many of y'all have heard of XML before or seen that abbreviation before? You've heard of it? Yeah? Just XML? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And yes, it's copyrighted said. They're exactly right. What it is, yeah, heard of it, never used it. Yep. It's basically what it is a markup language. So you know how last week, if you were around for last week's stream, we talked about Markdown, which is yet another kind of a markup language. And what markup is essentially you're giving style to text. Oh, the Fox viewer, they're Fox viewer. Thank you so much for the follow. Good to have you here. Gerald, thank you so much for the follow. Yeah, so what XML is essentially it's a styling language. It's a way to style text and to add sort of like Markdown or HTML. You can style with HTML as well. And what you'll notice is that as we change elements down here, it's going to change the styling of our GUI. And XAML is really just the specific type of XML that's used within Windows presentation format to add styling to GUIs. So XAML is just XML that's special for Microsoft. Yeah, it's a Microsoft version of markup. It exactly is. You're exactly right. You call it XAML? Sure. Yep. Yeah, it's like custom tags. Yeah, basically it is. So that's the file that we're going to do our styling in, and we've got some assembly info. That's fine. Actually, our main window here is actually where we're doing the styling. But so we're going to be doing some styling, and then what we'll see a little bit later is what we call a code behind window, which is where all of our functions are going to live. So our GUI is going to interact with event listeners and functions, which are going to make our GUI change accordingly, right? So just like in a full stack web application, you have a front end that faces the user, and then behind that you have functions and controllers and logic that are making that user interface change based on how the user is interacting with it. And we're going to be doing the exact same thing here. We're going to have a user face and user facing styling. And then behind that, we're going to have some functions written in C sharp, which are going to change our user interface. So tailwind for WPF. I guess so. Yeah. New K-pop band. Exactly. XAML K-pop band. I like that. So that's part one of the interface here. Part two is properties. So I'll pin that here. Properties are where, so based on what you've clicked on here, this will give you various properties that you can set. Now, there isn't much here right now, but once we start adding elements to our GUI, we'll see that there's a lot more properties that you can change and set. So for example, if I were to add a label or a text box or a button, we would see that I could set things like the size and location of that button, or the font size, or how the button behaves when you click it, what function gets called when you click that button. Does the button have a shadow? Like stuff like that. You can set all of those properties here, or you can do it within code. So we're going to see both ways of doing that while we're building this today. Hi, Hoshi. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, we're doing WPF today. WPF and C sharp. So we'll see a little bit more of that as we go. Next part of the interface is the stuff here on the left. Most importantly is the toolbox. So if I click on the toolbox, we can see that this contains a bunch of design elements that we could add, literally drag and drop into our application. So stuff like a text box, stuff like an image, and a label, checkboxes, buttons. So for example, if I take a button and I just drag and drop it here, voila, I suddenly have a button in my GUI. Or I could do something like, I don't know, a checkbox. Voila, checkbox. I could do a calendar. Voila, I have a calendar. So it's literally just a drag and drop from the toolbox into your GUI. Now I'm going to get rid of these because we don't want them right now, but that's just an example of stuff you can do. Java flashbacks. Hoshi says, could this XML be similar to Android Studio XML design language? Probably yes, if they both use XML, because XML is just a standard way of adding markup to text. So if Android Design Studio uses XML, then it's probably very similar. Where do you set your project resolution, width, and height? We're going to do that in just a second, Hoshi. Now, if you want to zoom in and out onto your project, you can do that by holding down Control and using the scroll wheel. So you can zoom in and out by Control and scroll wheel, and you can do the same thing in whatever window you're currently in. So every single window you can zoom in and out independently. Yeah, there is a lot of stuff on screen here, which is why I'm not going to have everything on screen at once. I'm pulling everything up right now just to show you, to familiarize you with the things that you could have up. But I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff while we're working because there's a lot of stuff on screen. I agree. And I actually lose some screen real estate because I have chat going on the right side of my screen. So is this the same as back in the days of Visual Basic? You can still build .NET apps on Visual Basic if you would like to. I work with a few apps at work that are built on Visual Basic. You can still build them in Visual Studio if you would like using Visual Basic. No problem at all. Ooh, thank you, Lormiz. Thank you for the follow. All right, so this is the toolbox. This is where you can drag and drop stuff in, or similar to HTML, you can just write the correct tag in your XML, in your XAML, and we're going to see how to do that in a minute. You can either drag and drop, or you can write the correct tag, and either way, it's going to cause that element to appear in the GUI. And speaking of that, down below here, we have our XAML designer. So I'm going to get rid of the Solution Explorer just for now to free up some space and pin these things. Make this a little bigger. Down here, this is our XAML designer. Or sorry, this is the designer itself up top here. This is this visual representation. And then this is the code editor down below. So it's essentially like you have a HTML window. You have your HTML open on one screen and you have your browser window open on the other. And you have NodeMon enabled and you can see the changes in real time as you're making. That's basically what you're doing here, except no browser involved. Hoshi says, "You know what? XML is just like HTML, or am I wrong?" Well, it's a way of marking up text. Yes, so it's similar in that way, but it isn't HTML. It's not the same thing. Yeah. Upload says, "I must have missed a step because nothing comes up under WPF." Um, are you using Visual Studio 2022, Copper Lily? Yes. Okay. And you searched for, let's see, make sure that you have all languages selected on the drop downs. Make sure you're selecting all languages, all platforms, and I would select desktop to narrow down your choices, but all languages, all platforms, and then search for WPF. See if that comes up. Is WPF also acceptable for 2024 onwards as a career tool? Yeah, absolutely. It's the basis for a lot of Windows applications. Mhm. All right, so these are the main parts of the interface. The code editor is essentially allows you to craft your UI by hand without using the designer, but you can use them in tandem. Hoshi, thank you for the follow. That's really weird. I'm not sure why WPF isn't coming up for you as an option. If you search for WinForms, does anything come up there? Oh, Copper Lily, when you installed Visual Studio 2022, did you choose the .NET developer package as an option? Maybe that you just didn't install that package. Yeah, I'm not sure. Windows desktop package or something like that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, if you could look at that fuel, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so those are the main elements of the interface. So now let's take a look at the XAML. So by the XAML, again, we're talking about this markup down here. And you can change the size of the display area just by dragging the grid, dragging the elements up and down. So we can make our XAML window bigger just by dragging it up like this, like a window shade. Or you can change the layout if you want by clicking on the vertical split. So we can see that there's a horizontal split, which we have now, or you could set it to vertical if you would like. Yeah, .NET Desktop Development Copper Lily is what you need to select. Or you can just watch. That's perfectly fine too. And you can definitely go back again and try later and follow the tutorial if you would like. So if you click horizontal split, yes, and you can definitely install additional packages later. Yes, this session is recorded, Hoshi, so anybody can go back and watch it again. Yeah. Yeah, and Fuel says if you launch the VS installer, there's a modify button that lets you add and remove features. Absolutely. Thank you, Fuel Snabble. I appreciate you looking at that. So you can change the layout to horizontal or vertical. Hey, welcome, Hunter. What are we up to in here? We are building a C# application with Visual Studio today. Absolutely, USMC. That's a great thing. Yeah. I'm going to put it just for maximum screen real estate here. I'm going to keep it at a horizontal, but if you have your full screen available, you might decide to do it in that horizontal split. I know that's how a lot of folks work in VS Code, so feel free to do it either way. Just you can click these little buttons over here to change your layout. So let's look at the XAML. So when your project is first created, it puts a certain amount of XAML in there automatically. And one of the main things you can see is it gave your main window a title, a height, and a width. Now these height and widths are in pixels, and so we can modify these values to change the size of your window. Yeah, Spire, you got it. Yay! No VS Codium today. Nope. Good afternoon, Quad Shot. Good to see you. Yeah, and you can also build desktop apps with Electron too. That uses web development frameworks to build desktop applications. It's actually how let's see, VS Code is actually Microsoft Teams was on Electron until recently, and I believe VS Code is actually powered by Electron. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe VS Code runs on Electron. Yep, exactly as Fuel said. VS Code is on Electron and Teams. Yep, Teams is switching to React, I believe, but either way. A lot of things are. So that's a great alternate way to develop desktop applications. C sharp screen stream. Yeah, Jim Fick, good to see you. Hmm. Okay, so this is the XAML. And as the tutorial says, XAML is simply XML that can be processed by the compilers that WPF uses. So it's just the Microsoft flavor of XML. It describes the WPF UI and interacts with .NET code. To understand XAML, you should at a minimum be familiar with the basics of XML. If you're familiar with any tag-based markup language, such as HTML, you'll be able to use XAML. It's no big deal. The document root, which is the window here, represents the type of object being described by the file. There are 8 attributes declared, and they belong to 3 categories. So first off, we have our namespace, which is this top thing right here. It provides structure to the XML, determining what XML content can be declared in the file. And these main attributes here, they import the namespace for the entire file and declare a bunch of stuff. We're not going to worry too much about that. And the class attribute right here maps the window to the type defined by your code. So essentially, we're attaching our style to the code that we're going to be building, the logic that's going to power that styling. Quadshot asked if their app might be too brave for a $100 project. It depends. I don't know your skill level, so if you find that you can't do a minimum viable product, if you can't get that working within a reasonable amount of time, then I would maybe scale back. So start with a minimum viable product that does just the basics of what you want to do before you add a bunch of features, and then see how long that takes you. We're using the community, Visual Studio Community. It's free. 2022. Visual Studio Community 2022. Mm-hmm. All right. And then finally, title. It's basically just the name of this particular GUI element. So in this case, we've called it main window, which I think makes perfect sense. So for now, let's just see how we can actually run this. So how do we run this to see if it's working? Well, it's pretty easy to do. At the very top of the window, you can choose how you want to run this. We're going to run it in debug mode. So debug mode is basically like the test mode. It's kind of like NodeMon, right? This isn't a production version of your application. You're just testing stuff. You're seeing how it runs. It's kind of like NodeMon. So we're going to say debug. You can target any CPU here, and then you just click the green arrow that's right next to the name of your project. So we're going to click this. It's going to do some funky stuff. This bar down here will turn red. And what it's going to do is it's going to make a build of your project, like a test build of your project. It's going to compile everything. It's going to pop up some cool looking graphs and stuff over here on the right side. And then we can see that our desktop application pops up on the screen. So we don't have anything here to interact with, but this is how you can run it to test it. Hey, Andres. We're doing well. How are you? It worked. Yeah, it did work. Yep. And if we want to stop it at any time, there's different ways you can stop it. You can click the X to close the window, or you can click the stop button here, stop debugging. So if I just click the X, it'll stop, it'll exit out of debug mode, and it'll put us back into development mode. Yeah, it's blank. Yeah. Got it. Crushed it. All right. So there's a couple things we're going to change right here off the bat. Main window isn't very descriptive of what we're trying to do, right? That doesn't really tell us much. And also, we want to be able to kind of change the size of this window. So as mentioned previously, there's a few different ways you could do it, but I think the easiest way to do it is just by editing directly within the XAML, by changing your size this way. Now, another way you could do it is I just zoom out here a little bit, is by dragging the handle of the window here. And notice when I do that, my width has just changed. So because I made it narrower. As I shrink it, we can see that these values are automatically updated. I make it bigger. The values are automatically updated again. So they're both feeding off of each other. Now, same deal. If I were to change, let's change the width to 500. immediately we can see that the GUI has changed the width. So I'm going to put it back to be slightly bigger just so you all can see it. We'll do 450 by 700. All right. And yet another way we could change the size if we wanted to was the properties window that I mentioned earlier. So if I pull this up, we'll see that I have a bunch of choices here. We could click under layout. And if I change layout here, for example, let's set the width back to 500. Again, we can see it changes. So that's 3 different ways that you could change the size of this box, right? I could do it directly in the GUI by dragging on the handle. I could change the height directly by entering a different number here in the XAML, or I could go over to properties and I could change it there. So whatever floats your boat, whatever cooks your goose, all those things, pick your poison. However you want to edit is fine. You might find that certain things are easier to edit in the properties window. Certain things are easier to edit in XAML. Certain things are easier to edit here in the designer. Either way, I'm going to get out of this properties for now. And we're going to mostly focus on the XAML. I love that it is WYSIWYG. Yeah, it is. That's really nice. I like that a lot when you're designing because I don't have very much of a head for design. I can't picture things in my head how they're going to look. I just can't. And so for me, as with my design impaired brain, it's very nice to be able to kind of plot things out in real time on the GUI and see how they're going to look. Okay. So as the tutorial mentions, WPF provides a powerful layout system with many different layout controls. So these controls are going to help us place and size child controls and can even do so automatically. We're going to see a little bit of that here. The default layout control provided to you is the grid control, which we see here. Now, if you're familiar with CSS, you might say, that sounds familiar. In CSS, what does grid do? If I'm using grid in CSS, what does that do for us? If I'm using grid in CSS and building a web application, what does grid do? You'll need the .NET desktop development there, Hoshi. Yeah, .NET desktop. Day one says, doesn't that make boxes? Good for layout. Yeah, it basically helps you with layout by giving you a grid of rows and columns on which to arrange your elements. So it literally splits it up into a series of squares, and then you put elements inside of those squares. And so by default, it's going to give us the ability to create a grid in which we can literally just plonk various elements down and put them in the right location inside of our GUI. The grid control defines rows and columns and what your controls will be. A grid always has a single row and column declared, but that doesn't really give you much flexibility in placing controls. So what we're going to do is we're going to split the grid into essentially 2 rows and 2 columns. So it's going to make it smaller chunks. And that's extremely easy to do. You'll notice, hey, Chris and Chris, welcome to the stream. You'll notice that as we add these elements, you're literally going to see new grid lines appearing inside of our GUI, which are going to help us build out our actual, buttons and boxes and that kind of thing. All right, so inside of my grid tags here, and this is going to be extremely similar to HTML. If you've ever used HTML before, this is going to make a lot of sense because you're just going to put tags in tags. You're going to have parent tags and child tags. So inside of my grid tag here, first thing is I'm going to set a property of margin. Oops, margin. There we go. Margin 10. And as soon as I do that, we can see that I get a little margin of 10 around all sides of my grid box. And then inside of the grid tag, I'm going to say, put a little space here so you can see it. I'm going to say grid dot row definitions. And I'm going to have 2 of those. So I'm going to have 2 rows, and then down here, I'm going to have 2 columns. So column definitions, where first we define our rows, then we define our columns down here. All right, and then for the actual rows themselves, first off, we're gonna just set them with automatic width and height. Oh, thank you so much for the hydrate.
Quad shot Kung Fu just redeemed hydrate.
Thank you. And as soon as I do this, we're gonna see how it changes the way the GUI looks. Height is just gonna be star for now. And we're gonna have 2 of those. There we go. And as soon as I did that, we can now see that my GUI has been split into 2 vertical rows of equal height, just like we would if we were using CSS. And then we're gonna do the same thing for columns. Except these are gonna have a width of star. There we go. And now my GUI is split into 4 equal squares. So pretty easy, right? And what this is gonna do is it's gonna give us basically areas for our various elements to snap to in the grid and create a nice clean layout for us. Right? Making sense so far? Now that we've added our actual grid, and we are going to take a break here shortly, but I do want to at least get one element on the board as far as an actual control. So far, so good. All right. Now the grid has been created, we can start adding controls to it. So we're going to first start out with just a label control. Good. Okay. And that's really easy to do. And in fact, it looks exactly like HTML. Again, it's just another type of markup, another way of styling text. And so if I wanted to add a label in HTML, I would just say tag label, right? Just label. And then I would put the contents of that label, the text, inside of it. There we go. And I've done so. Now I'm going to do something else here just to make things more visible. That's really small. So I'm going to change my global font size to make things bigger. I'm going to do that real quick just so you can actually read it. I'm going to do view. Here's my properties window. 1 second. Oh, there we go. Yeah. I'm going to change my global font size to be much bigger because my resolution is ridiculously small. Oh, here we go. I'm going to change this to like 36. There we go. Much better. All right. Perfect. And we're going to make this bigger too. Okay, so what you can see now is it actually put my label in the upper left quadrant of the grid, right? It actually put my label in the upper left quadrant of the grid. It's a label maker. Yeah. And we're going to, in just a minute, I'm going to tell you how to move that around. That's the next thing we're going to do. We're going to move it around. And then we're going to add some more elements, such as a text input box and a list viewer. And we're going to add an insert button. And then we're going to add some code against the back of that. So this doesn't look like much quite yet, but I hope you can see the similarities between something like HTML and how you would add elements that way versus, this is really should be pretty familiar to you. And another way you could add elements is by simply dragging them in. So for example, I could add another label here by just dragging and dropping. There we go. But instead, I'm going to undo that. I could drag it, for example, down here, something like that. But instead, we're going to edit the XAML directly. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to save this. We're going to take a 5-minute break because we like to do that at the top of each hour. And then when we come back, we're actually going to start getting into the meat of this. We're going to add some text input boxes. We're going to add some event listeners. And we're going to add some functions that are going to actually do the legwork for us. We're going to do a little bit of C#. Good hello world, goodbye CPU. Yeah, exactly. Now to save it, it's very easy. You can do Control S or you can do File and Save. I'm going to do Save All, and that's just saving my entire project. All right, 5 minutes. When we come back, things are going to get a little bit more interesting. We're going to start adding some more elements. We're going to start adding some actual C sharp behind the scenes. Oh, you had the wrong .NET package installed. Okay, awesome, Copper Lily. I'm glad you figured it out. Way to go. Alrighty. So yeah, when we come back, we're gonna start doing some C sharp, a little bit more XAML editing, and I'm going to show you what we mean by things like code behind and some other elements of the application that we haven't seen before. Follow. Thank you for the follow, Shazlan. Much appreciated. Alrighty, 5 minutes. See y'all back here soon. I won't forget you. Don't worry, Hoshi. Also, if you've never coded in C sharp before, don't worry. You're going to find that it looks extremely similar to JavaScript, and you're going to see pretty much a bunch of elements that you recognize that are really similar, and you're going to go, wow, maybe I could build something in C sharp too, because I had the same discovery. Alrighty, be right back. right, folks, we got about a minute left in the break. If you're catching up, such as Hoshi there, please check out the link to the tutorial that's pasted by Moobot just above. Follow the tutorial. It tells you exactly what to pick and what not to pick. So hopefully that's helpful. You can pull that up, have that, in the background and reference it. We're literally following that exactly. So get on ready to come on back whenever you're ready. Get yourself a glass of water, get up and stretch if you haven't already. Pet your dog, pet your significant other with their permission, of course, and then come on back. Oh, and Chaotic Monkey, thank you so much for the follow. I appreciate it. You thought you could sneak it in there, try to follow me while I was on break, but I see you. Thank you, Chaotic. Alrighty, and we are back, folks. Good to see you all again. Let's keep on going with this. Build out our Windows application. Alrighty, so right now we just added a label to the first quadrant of our grid here. Now this is all fine, right? But right now, this one label element is taking up essentially this whole entire quadrant of our application, which isn't really what we want. This needs to be smaller. We want this label to only take up, as much space as it needs, not like the whole, quarter of our app. So let's figure out how we can make this smaller. So what we can do is we can head back up here to our row definitions. And instead of star, we're going to change this to auto. And what that's going to do, just like in CSS, no difference, what that's going to do is only make it take up as much space as it needs to function, right? So when I change this to auto, we can see that immediately this quadrant or this row has shrunk down to only take up the height of our label. So we change it to auto, it shrinks it down. So when we change the height attribute of the first row definition, the auto value automatically sizes the grid row to the size of its contents, just like in CSS. USMC says, question, since it's not a CSS grid, is it responsive and can it be adjusted to less spaces like one space of 12 or 3 of 12? Yeah, so yeah, it can be auto. You can adjust it to auto, right? Like we just did. You can really make it whatever size it needs to be or as many rows and columns as you need. Mm-hmm. And again, just like we did with the overall form size, you could also add a custom size to the label itself. So if I open the properties window for this, we can see that right now the width and height are set to auto, but you can adjust those if you need to. You can change all sorts of aspects of this. We're not really going to mess with this. It's a little bit advanced for what we're talking about today, but there's tons of properties that you can set here to make it look really however you want. We'll get rid of that for now. So now let's talk about placement. So what if we don't want this label to be in the top left corner of our GUI, right? What if we don't want it there? So the label created in the section above was automatically placed in row 0 and column 0 of the grid. The numbering from rows and columns starts at 0, as it should. D3, thank you for the follow. Great to have you here. The numbering for rows and columns starts at 0 and increments by 1 for each new row and column. The control doesn't know anything about the grid, and the control doesn't define any properties to control its placement within the grid. The control could even have been placed within some other layout or control that has its own set of rules. So how do you tell a control to use a different row or column when the control has no knowledge of the grid? So you just add a property to it. The grid defines new properties that the child controls can declare and use. The properties don't actually exist on the control itself, they're attached to the grid. Now, if that doesn't make sense, that's okay. We're going to see what that looks like in just a second. It's a little confusing wording, right? But we're going to demonstrate that. The grid defines two properties to determine the row and column placement of a child control. Grid.row or grid.column. So essentially all we're doing here is we're saying, hey, this element is inside of a grid. So if we want it to be in a different row or column, we just tell it that. We're going to say grid.column equals whatever, 1 or 2 or whatever. So what we're going to do is inside of our label, we're just going to say grid.column is equal to 1. And as soon as I do that, boop, my label moves from 0 to 1. Okay? Pretty easy. Now we're actually going to start adding some more elements. This is where it gets a little bit more fun. So we've got our label in the place where we want it to be. Now I want to go ahead and add a list box control on the row below the label. So what the list box is going to do is it's literally what it says on the tin. It's a box and you put a list in it where you can have a list of things in a box. Drunko Grandma says, still waiting for the Tailwind install command. No, we got all the styling we need here with XAML. Thank you for the follow, Peruvian. Good to have you here. So our list box is going to be in row 1 and column 0. And we're going to give this control a name of list names. We're going to give it a name because we're going to assign a function to it, essentially. We're going to have an event. It's going to have an event listener and a function attached. Hola, Peruvian. Good to have you here. So once a control is named, it can be referenced in the code behind. So we can assign a function to it or a listener to it. Alrighty. Just below my label, I'm going to add a new tag here called listbox. Or I could alternatively, I could drag and drop it onto the GUI as well. But we're going to use just as a tag here. Listbox. And we're going to say grid.row is going to be 1 because we want it on the second row. So this is the first row, 0. Here's the second row. And the name is going to be list names. And then after that, I can close the tag. And now I've got a list box right here. It's a little hard to see, but there is a list box there. And if we were to just run this, you could see that pretty easily. There'd just be an empty list box there. All right, now we're going to add a couple more controls. We're going to add essentially the button that's going. We're going to add an input box here where people can type, and we're going to add the button that's going to add things into the list. And we're going to give both of those things names because they're going to have event listeners and functions attached to them, just like we would in JavaScript. But in order for those things to be stacked on top of each other rather than occupying all the space in that quadrant, we can use another tag called stack panel. And what stack panel allows us to do is put a stack of things in a particular quadrant. So you use the stack panel, things stack on top of each other. Pretty easy, right? All right. I may never code again, just drag and drop if you start using WPF. You can do that in WinForms too. So both WinForms and WPF allow you to just drag and drop stuff into the grid or into your GUI, which is pretty nice, especially for folks like me who do not have very much of a head for design. I find that very useful. All right, so we're going to put our stack panel. Oops. Also, too, if you haven't noticed me doing this, while you're typing, for example, the name of a tag, you can hit tab to essentially have it input the suggestion for you. So if you're used to using emit in VS Code, this is essentially the same thing. It's like emit, just tab, and it'll complete it for you. Get some autocomplete. So grid dot row is going to be 1. And what column is this? So I want to, essentially I've got my list box over here and I want my stack panel to be over here. So what is my column going to be? What is my grid.column going to be? Grid.column is going to be what? Yeah, Windows Forms, yes, does have a very simple drag and drop experience. It's very nice. Oh, and there's also a secret WPF designer in the VS family called Blend. Okay. I actually have seen that. That's actually on my work machine right now, and I haven't used it, so I'll have to check it out. So if I want my stack panel, the thing I'm building right now, if I want it to be here in this quadrant, what column should it be in? What should I put for my column value here to make it sit right here on the right side, lower right quadrant? We've got our row. So this is row 0 here, and our stack panel is going to be in row 1. So what column should it be in? Yeah, exactly. 1, 1, right? Yeah. So it's going to be here in column 1. And then I can add a little margin here as well, just like we would, if we were styling in a web application. Oh, so if you want to get fancy, then you use Blend. Okay. For most of my internal apps that I build for work, I don't want to get fancy. They look like Windows 95, and that's all really anybody cares about. Most of the time, if you're building internal applications like utility applications for your employers, stuff that only gets used by internal teams, you're going to find that most tools look like they came straight out of Windows 95. Like literally, they're out of Windows 95, maybe Windows 98 if you're lucky. But yeah, we're all still rocking Windows 95 around there. They're ugly, but they're very clear. Usually, they're very straightforward in their design. Hey, Fuel Snabble, I love Bootstrap. That's why, yeah, because it's very clear and straightforward. What it does what it says on the tin, right? All right, so we got our margin, and then we can close this tag. And inside of our stack panel, that's where we're going to put our text box for inputs, and we're going to put a button just below it. Now, again, because we used a stack panel, those two things are going to automatically stack on top of each other. So text box, you can see as soon as I type the text box tab, I now have a text box. And then below that, I'm going to put a button. There we go. So text box and button. Now I can add some properties to this. So my text box, hey Mattel, good to see you. I'm going to give the name of text name, and my button, I'm going to give the name of button add. All right, and my button is also going to have a margin of, margin is going to be 0, 5, 0, 0. Just like if you were doing CSS styling, the margins are applied in the same way. It does like, top right, bottom left. So that's why we've got 4 values here. It's exactly the same as you would do in CSS. And then my text here is going to say add name. There we go. Nice big old button, nice input box for text. Voila, all good. Fuel Snabble says for internal apps, I need big bang for the buck. Yeah, so right, and most internal apps are about function and not style, exactly. So if you were to look at any of the apps that I've built for my internal team, they all use Windows Forms, and they all look like they're straight out of Windows 95, but they work, and that's the important part. Yeah, fancy means some will not know how to use them. Exactly, that's the point. They need to be written as straightforward as possible, and everybody knows how to look at a Windows interface and identify the parts of it and know what to click. So, yep. All right, so we've added all of our elements. We've got our GUI built. So now let's actually start adding some code. Let's actually write a little bit of C#. iSpire's already done. Nice, way to go. So the button we've created, we want something to happen when a user clicks on this, right? When they click the button, we want a thing to happen. So if you're writing a web app in JavaScript and you wanted something to happen when a button was clicked, what would we do for that button? What would we add to that button? If we wanted that button to wait for a click and do something, yeah, we would add an event listener, right? Something to listen for a certain type of event and then do the thing, right? Execute a function. Exactly. So we're going to essentially do the same thing. We're going to generate a method that is going to be listening specifically for a click on that button and then perform an action based on that click. So next thing we're going to do is generate the handler code. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you could do that. Um, we're going to follow the tutorial here and we're going to add it manually like this. We're going to say click. But for the next one, I can also show you some other ways to do it. And we can give our event handler a name. So we're going to say button add name underscore click. And now that I've given this a name, I can essentially create a method in my code, in my C# code, that has the same name and is attached to the click. Now, if we wanted to had a different element such as, I don't know, hover, right? We could call this hover and then have a action that takes place when the user hovers over it, right? But here we specifically want to listen for a click and then execute this based on that click. So if I want to now code that method in C sharp, again, there's a few different ways I could get to that. I could, as I'm typing here, is I could click on new event handler, the suggestion that it gives me. Or the way that I like to do it is find the element that I want to add a listener for or a handler for and double click on it. So here in my GUI, I'm going to double click and it'll automatically generate a method for me. Now you might say, wait a minute. Where are we now? Like, what is this? Well, all of a sudden we got a bunch of code here. It looks different. Like what the flip is this? So I'm going to pull up the Solution Explorer and show you exactly where we're at. We are now in what's called the code behind. So previously we've been working in our designer in our XAML. Now we are in what's called the code behind. So this is the code that's triggered off of the GUI elements that the users interact with, the specific methods that are triggered from GUI elements. So if I hover over this file name, we can see that this is called main window.xaml.cs, because now we're working in C sharp. No longer, we're not working in XAML anymore. We're going to work in C sharp to code the logic. And if you wanted to navigate to that, you could find it right here. So previously we were working in main window.xaml, and now we're working in what's called the code behind, because it's the code behind the GUI. So now we're in main window.xaml.cs. Yeah, and if you're wondering why my text is very large, it's because I made it bigger, just so you all could see it better. You don't have to do that. My the resolution of my monitor is very high, and so everything is really small unless I make it super big. So just for you all's sake, I've made the text size a lot bigger. And Hoshi says, for each single element, would a C sharp file be generated? No. That's a good question, though. But what you'll find is as we add more elements, such as the thing that handles, putting things in the list box, right? Or the thing that, our click element right here, you'll find that they all get added into this file that we're working in right now. You'll see that we're going to have multiple functions in here that are going to be doing different things that are going to be triggered by these interactions with their interface. Okay. And the tutorial actually tells you that there's yet another way that you can generate a method. So the way I did it, which I think is the easiest way, is by double clicking on the element itself, which automatically creates this for you. But another way you could do it is by right clicking on the element and say, what is it? Go to definition. So you could go to definition if you wanted. Oh, sorry, you got to click here. My bad. Yeah. So if you click on the element in the XAML designer, you could say go to definition, and that will also take you to that function. All right. So now let's fill this out. Let's actually set it to do something when the button is clicked. Yeah, WPF supports, for better or worse, a bunch of different ways to organize your GUI. But in this style, you would get a C# class per Windows, or custom user control. Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways. As you can see, there's a bunch of different ways to interact with this stuff. But by default, you're going to get this. All right, so now let's actually write some C#. Let's look at what this is here and how it's similar and or different to JavaScript. So let's write the C# first, and then we'll talk about it in See if we can figure out what it's doing. So what we want to do in this particular function is when the button is clicked, we want the code to read whatever the user typed in the box, a name preferably, read whatever they typed in the box and add it to the list. So we're essentially in the end, we're going to end up with a list of names. So just to remind you all what that looks like, before we talk through the logic, I'll just run the finished version. So we can see here, I could type something like Mayan Wolf, and I could click add name, and it immediately adds it to the list box, right? I could type Rufio, click add, or Leon, click add. And then if I try to type the same name again, it's not going to add. It's just going to disappear. Okay, so that's all that we want to be handled by the function behind this button. Yeah, if I type the same name again, it just clears the box. It doesn't add it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're just starting out, Windows Forms is pretty easy to get started with. Yeah. All right. So let's code that out. So I'm going to say if not string dot is null or white space, then so essentially what we're doing here is we're checking to see if our input box, which is called text name, if the text is not with the bang, right? Null or white space. So if the text box has something in it, ampersand, ampersand, I'll let you guys tell me what that means. I think you've probably seen that before. Then we also want to check if our list box, so list names, items, dot contains, then I can actually, I'll accept that suggestion from GitHub Copilot. So essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, if they've typed something in the box and our list box doesn't, with the bang, doesn't contain that text, then we want to write it to the list box. And if both of those conditions are passed, then format it a little better there. Then we want to add it to the list box. So list names, and it's auto completing for me. It's pretty nice. Then list names.items.add, whatever they typed in the box. And then clear the box. All right. So love Copilot. Yeah, it's pretty nice. So this, if you're familiar with JavaScript, some stuff here probably looks familiar, right? We've got the bang that signifies not, right? We already know that. We've got an if statement. That's pretty usual. We know what if statements are and how they work, right? You have if parenthesis, and then you put your conditions in the parenthesis, and then you have curly brackets, and you put your condition, what you want to happen after the if statement. If the if statement is true, then this is the stuff that's going to happen. So looks pretty familiar. There are some differences here, right? When I declare my function, this is my function name, but I also have to give it certain properties like private, void, that kind of thing. We can see this is set as public. We've got, partial. There's a few new phrases here, but you don't have to worry about that a ton right now when you're playing around. The one important thing to remember is that JavaScript and C# are both based on C syntax. So they have the same underlying syntax. And so you're going to see a lot of familiar things. However, C# is what's called a typed language. And if you've ever used like TypeScript before, you should kind of know what types are, right? We're talking about string, we're talking about varchar, we're talking about number, that type of thing. And so C# is a typed language. And so everything that you define has to have a defined type. And so that's essentially what's happening here. We're defining these things and we're giving them types. Um, After I declare my function, I essentially just pass in the parameters. And if you've just double clicked on the element, all these things will be defined automatically. We didn't have to type them. But essentially, what we're doing here is we are passing in an object and we're passing in E. Now, you've seen E before, right? What does E stand for? When we pass in E, what are we passing in? What is E? Yes, exactly. It's an event, right? It's an event. So basically, we're passing in information about the user's interaction. Now, events can be a lot of different things. They could be a scroll, they could be a hover, they could be the user typing something, right? And we, you know, are often going to want to know information about that interaction. So when they clicked, what they're typing, that type of thing. So that's why we're passing in E here automatically. Hey, Robodom, good to see you. Yes, it's not an exception handler. It's actually the event, what the user is interacting with. Hey, Bombaloni. And so then inside of our function, when that button is clicked, we're saying, hey, we're checking to see if what they typed in that input box is null or white space, and what they're typing in that input box is a string. So it's a string. We're checking to see is it null or white space, and the thing that we're checking is what they typed in the box. And then the bang or the exclamation point essentially is not, right? So it reverses that. So if it's null or white space, the answer to this question is going to be true. However, we have the bang here, so that reverses it, and it says it's false. Shebang, shebang. I know. Yeah. And then we have the double ampersand, and the double ampersand, same thing as in JavaScript, means that if this first item is false, then the second item doesn't get evaluated at all. It just skips it. But if the first item is true, then it's going to go on to the second item, check and see whether it's true or false, and then determine whether to proceed with the if statement. So if this one is true, it will go ahead and check this one. And if it's false, then it will skip the rest of the if statement. So what the second statement is checking here is if our list of names, the items in that list already contains the thing that the user was typing in the box. So for example, if my list already contains Mayan Wolf and I type Mayan Wolf again, then essentially this is going to evaluate to false again because of the exclamation point. Your favorite operator, the bang. All right, so I hope that makes sense, but you're allowed to say, if this doesn't make sense, what this is evaluating here, you're allowed to say, hey, that doesn't make sense. Can you explain it again? And we'll walk through it again. So that's okay. You're allowed to say that. But hopefully this looks somewhat familiar if you've used JavaScript before, because again, same syntax. All right. So if this whole statement evaluates to true, then we go into our if and we say, hey, into that list box, we're going to add another item and it's going to add whatever the user typed in. And then it's going to clear the input box so that the user can enter something else. Okay, now let's test it, see if it works. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Actually, no, I need to save it first. Sorry. You can save by Control S, or you can do File, Save All. And then I'm going to go ahead and run again in debug mode. Ship to user, let them test it. I believe they call that a scream test. And we're building, we're building. You can tell that it's running the build mode when this bar down here turns red. All right. Type a name. There we go. We've got a name. And I can type another name. And another name. Hooray! It works. Now, if you're wanting to catch up with this and be like, hey, I want to build that too, then you can. I have a repo with this essentially this finished code in it right now. So you can do exclamation point project and click the first link, and that will take you to the repo where this code lives. So I have the code. If you want to catch up, um, you can go ahead and clone it down if you would like. Does the unique check work? Yeah, let's try it. Yep, it does. So it's not adding anything new to the box. And this looks a little bit different from like the finished version I show you, right? There's no delete button on here yet because that's some extra functionality that I added. So I wasn't sure honestly how long this would take to do. So I did add a few extra functions, a little bit extra functionality. So we're going to go ahead and add those extra things that aren't in the tutorial. Rid of that. RoboDom, if you want a link directly to the repo that we're working with today, you can do !project if you would like. Wait, how do you run it again? Yeah, so here, I'll stop it and start it again. So up here at the top of the screen, if you want to run this, you're going to want to run it in debug mode. You can leave it on any CPU and you just click the little solid green arrow right here. And it'll do a build, it'll check and make sure everything is working, and then it'll bring your project up. Okay? Yeah, and you could add extra functionality like trimming white spaces, checking for case sensitivity, that kind of thing, if you would like. But what I would like to do next is kind of implement more crud functionality. So what if we wanted to delete something, right? What if we wanted to delete? Or what if we wanted to be able to edit existing entries? So for example, if I add something here, right now I have no way, like I can click on this, but I have no way to delete it or edit it at all. So what I actually want to do is add crud functionality. So I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with this one single function here. What I'd like to do is add more types of things, right? So we can see a little bit more how, if we add more functions, how do those look? Um, what can those things do for us? If we add more functions, how do those look? What happens if I want to do something like if I let's say I want to be able to double click on this to edit it, right? How is that going to look? So let's add a few more of those things. I love crud. I know everything's a crud. Yeah. No matter what application you're building, at the very least, if you can do crud with it, then you can build pretty much anything you want. Crud is great. I love it. Everything's a crud. All right, we're going to stop this. Again, to stop it, I can either click the red X or I can click the stop button. Either one will work. All right, so we're running the app. And that's where the tutorial ends, as I mentioned before. But we're going to add a little bit of extra functionality to this. So I'm going to pull up the finished version here in my other window, just for my own notes. Stop the finished version. Give me just a moment. We're going to keep going from there. All right, so the next thing I want to do is we'll go ahead and add delete functionality. So I'm going to head back over to my designer tab. So I can click between my code tab and my designer tab, just like I would in VS Code by clicking on the tabs at the top here. Everything's a crud. We just use RUD, where U means upsert. Yeah, so the first thing we're going to do, exactly, Hoshi, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add another button to the UI. And the nice thing is, because we because we put this stacking functionality here inside of this quadrant, if I go to add another button, I can just put it inside of my stack panel. So right here, actually, I can just copy this whole button tag, which I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this whole button tag, paste it here. I'm going to give it a different name. What did I call it? I called it button delete. Okay, button delete. Just like that. I'm going to give it the same margins, and then I'm going to give it a different click event. I'm going to give it a different click event, and I'm going to call it button del name underscore click. And then the text on the button, I just want to say delete name, like so. So once again, I did it exactly the same way as my ad name, except I changed the name of the button itself to be button delete. Same margin, my click event, is going to be called button del name underscore click. And then the text in the button itself is delete. I put Paul Rudd in my app, but it's not deleting. Show me Tane, right? You ever see that skit? That's Paul Rudd, right? Delete, exactly. Yes, Celery Man, that's it. Oh man, if you've never seen the Celery Man skit with Paul Rudd, it's incredible. I love it so much. Yes, show me Celery Man. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have our button now, and we have an event set up that's going to handle our interactions with it. So I'm going to do it with my preferred method. I'm just going to double click on my button, and as soon as I do, it's going to put another function inside of my code behind window. So inside of my namespace, I now have a function for handling our add button click and a separate function now for handling our delete button clicks. Robodom says, I've never used C# before. Do you recommend we learn the fundamentals before messing around with this project? No, honestly, no. If you follow the tutorial that's if you do exclamation point project, it gives you a link to the tutorial that we followed today. I would suggest just following that word for word. You'll build an app, it's going to work, and then you can fiddle around with the code if you would like. Yeah. No, I just dove straight into C#. I But hey, that's how my brain works. So not everybody's brain is going to work like mine. Some people like to read a bunch of documentation first and then try to build something with it. My brain doesn't work that way. I have to like actually get my hands dirty and start building things. And then when I don't understand something, that's when I go back and I read the documentation to understand what it is I'm trying to or how to do something. So, but that's me. Icefire says, but delete button in the tutorial. No, we're going beyond. We're out of the boundaries now. We're adding stuff. So just a little bit, not a lot. Ormond says Rust. Nope, this is C#. However, I do believe Rust is a C syntax language, just like C# and JavaScript are. So they look very similar. There's a lot of languages in that family, so that once you know one of them, maybe JavaScript or C# or whatever, you could probably pick up these other languages very quickly and easily. Take the tutorial and improve on it. Absolutely, that's what we're doing here. All right. So button del name click, this one's going to be very simple. So if I click on, essentially what I want to do here is I want to be able to click on something in the list box. So I want to be able to choose a name in my list box, click on it, and then click the delete button and have it disappear. That's all I want to do. Just click on something in the list box, click delete, it should vanish. Okay? So essentially, the things I want to check and see, all right, if something is selected, then delete it. If nothing is selected, then don't delete it, right? That's really it. So if in our list box, so list names is the name of our list box, has a selected item, if it's not null, and Copilot is helping me out here. So if list item, selected item is not null or not equals null, again, just like JavaScript, list item not equals null, then get rid of the item from our list box. List items.item.remove. List names dot selected item. Okay, pretty straightforward. So user has clicked on something, that's a selected item. If that's not null, then remove that item from the list box. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that I've got a little red squiggly line. It's telling me there's something wrong. Any guesses on what might be missing here? Well, we can hover over it and see what the problem is. So what's the problem here? What is it trying to tell me? What's missing? Here's a major difference between C# or in most strongly typed languages and JavaScript is that the semicolons are required. Oh no, you actually have to use semicolons. So as soon as I add one, then it fixes itself. Yeah. So Like most strongly typed languages, you gotta use semicolons. They are required. Just FYI. But luckily, it's pretty good at warning you when they're missing. So should help out. All right. I believe it, yeah, and they're required in TypeScript too. So again, it's the type thing. I'm not quite sure. Not quite sure what you're asking there, Hoshi. I apologize. I don't quite understand your question. Popularly says C got me used to semicolons. Yeah, again, JavaScript, C sharp, all these languages, they all rely on C syntax. And JavaScript is actually the weird one out of most of the C family because it isn't strongly typed, right? It doesn't care what the heck you do. It is so Wild West, it's insane. You can do whatever the hell you want, right? Most languages are not like that. JavaScript is kind of wild, it's kind of out of left field. Most languages are not like JavaScript in that regard. Most languages do have certain rules around that kind of thing. Oh, Icefire says, I tried making Windows apps in C back in the 80s. Woo! Before C Sharp and Visual Studio were around, it was a nightmare. So good to be able to come back and do it now. That's awesome. Yeah. So many of these newer languages improve on the limitations and confusion of the older ones. And I think that's really cool. Frankly says, does Prettify fix missing semicolons? Yeah. So if I take away the semicolon here, you can see it's going to underline again, but I get this flashing light bulb. So you see the light bulb? And it says light bulbs like this will show you potential fixes. And so you can you can either click on the little down arrow here and it will show you what it's going to fix and it'll do it for you. Oh, it should. Um, Normally it would. Show potential fixes. Well, okay. It's not going to do it right now, but for a lot of things, if you click on show potential fixes, it will show you what it's going to do. You just select that thing, the thing that you want, and it will fix it for you. Popularly says, I went from Python to C, so that was pretty wild. Alrighty, so that's really all we need for our delete. That'll make it work. So let's save it. Just gonna do file save all. And now let's try running it again. So I'll add a name, and then I'll add another name, and I'll add another name. One more just for funsies. Okay. Now let's say I want to get rid of, oh, all these are great people. I don't want to get rid of anybody, but we'll get rid of Primogen. Sorry, Primogen. And we'll delete them. There we go. And they're gone. And we'll get rid of me. There we go. And we're done. So pretty easy, right? Please type in a very long name. Okay. I don't know. There you go. We're making the death note. So when I do that, there's certain default functionality that's built into a lot of these elements. So you can see there, it automatically put a horizontal scroll bar for me. And also as I resize the window, it's going to resize the elements inside of it. Yeah, scroll bar. So again, just like in like if you're writing in HTML, certain elements have just default behavior configured for them. Now you can modify a lot of that default behavior if you want. You can get rid of it, you can change it, whatever. But a lot of them do have certain default behaviors. For example, by default, like a button is going to have highlighting when you hover over it. Pretty standard. You know, an input box is going to show a flashing cursor. A list box is going to have a scroll bar. And if I were to add a bunch of names, it would have a vertical scroll bar as well. So yeah, just basic built-in behavior that you can modify if you want to. The resizing part is one area where WPF default behavior is much nicer than Windows Forms. Yeah, I agree. Yep. I remember coding the resize logic by hand. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, so now I can speak from experience in modern day Windows Forms, the resizing is better. You can make the window bigger or smaller, but a lot of the times the contents don't alter themselves when you resize the window. You have to actually configure that to happen. So this is better, the fact that the contents are responsive. I can't buy stuff. Y'all are funny. Yeah, it's amazing how you can build apps these days. Absolutely. Yeah, so WPF is Windows' most modern framework for building Windows specific applications. WPF is the most modern one. But WinForms still works too. Like I say, it's actually what I use for work. Um, I want to switch us over to using WPF, but it's really not necessary for the type of app we're building at work. It's just internal stuff. It doesn't matter. It can look like Windows 95. It doesn't matter. But it is kind of nice for stuff like this. Oh, she says, what if we need to use 2D assets and graphics? You can. Windows WPF can handle pretty complex stuff. You can configure the GUI to look pretty much however you want. You can have graphics, assets, whatever you want to add. WinForms is limited, a little bit more limited just because it's older, but WPF should be able to handle whatever you throw at it. All right, now let's add a little bit. Yeah, exactly. As Fuel says, WPF handles images, video, and 3D. Exactly. Like I say, it's the modern framework for Windows app development. If you're creating games, you'd probably use Unity or something like that. But depends on what you're building. Okay, so now let's add some more functionality. So I can click on these things. Oh, Fuel says you can do games in WPF. Okay, I was wrong. That's good to know. There you go. You can build some games in WPF. So I can click on these things right now, but what if I wanted to be able to, for example, double click on something and edit it, right? So this is a different type of interaction. I'm not clicking a button, I'm not typing anything. I just want to be able to like double click on this right here, or for example, this one. I want to be able to double click on it and then have it go back into the box so that I can edit it. So let's go ahead and add that functionality. We're going to kind of finish out our crud here, right? We've done create, we've done read, and we've done delete. But so let's finish it out. Finish out the crud with update. Yeah, I'm sure you could probably make a nice indie game. Yeah, like a quiz game, a 2D indie game. I'm sure you could do that in WPF. Yeah. Yes, you're exactly right, Hoshi. We're going to add a listener to list names. So to this box right here, that's going to listen specifically for double clicks. So previously we've been listening for single clicks. Now we're going to listen for double clicks, and we're going to add some functionality. Okay. Like I said, C# is pretty easy to pick up once you see how similar it is to JavaScript, and you start getting familiar with just working with Visual Studio in general. Because Visual Studio is really overwhelming at first. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to the interface. It's definitely harder to pick up than VS Code, but once you get familiar with the interface, you can start to build C# apps pretty easily. And I'll tell you, I started out actually what the older apps at my work used was actually Visual Basic, which you may have heard of. Visual Basic is another language that you can use for developing applications. It's still pretty widely used, although it's not built on C syntax. So it has a different syntax. It does a lot of the same stuff, but just a different way of writing the code. And I was having a hard time getting my head around it because it looked so different than what I'd done before. But then as soon as I switched to C# to build some new stuff for new development, then I was like, okay, I get this now. I know what this looks like. I know what these things do. I might get the syntax wrong sometimes because it's a little different than JavaScript, but I can really easily read and write it. Just double click and then boom, we're not in Kansas anymore. Icefire says, yep, took a VB class, didn't really do anything with it. Yeah, a lot of the applications that I use at work, or the custom applications that were written for work, were not written by me. They were written by someone who'd been on the team for a very long time and had always been programming in Visual Basic. And I asked him one day, I was like, why did you choose Visual Basic rather than C#? Like, why do you write everything in Visual Basic? Um, and it, the person that wrote them was just like, well, that's what they'd always used, right? A lot of it depends on where you started. It's what they'd always used. They never saw the need to do anything differently, so they never learned C sharp. Um, yeah, 1990s, and that this person is from that era of when VB was the thing, like the thing that you use. They're from the 80s, 90s programming era. Started writing things in COBOL, even before that. Um, so yeah, Visual Basic is fine to learn if you have to learn it for your job, but I wouldn't recommend learning it just for fun. Um, Microsoft is trying to get away from Visual Basic as a language. They've stopped adding new features to it. They're still supporting it. Don't get me wrong. A lot of things are still written in Visual Basic and they work fine. But no new features are being added. All new support that Microsoft is developing is for C sharp and F sharp, two of its newer languages. So if you're going to pick up something new, I would pick up C sharp, not Visual Basic. VB6 crushed. Hey, Dan can code. Good to see you. Visual Basic is a language. Yes, it's very similar to C sharp in the kind of things that it can do. But like I said, it's no longer supported. Or, well, it's still supported. It's no longer being developed as adding features. But you can still build stuff in Visual Basic and Visual Studio, no problem at all. Some of you actually may have used Visual Basic without realizing it. If you've ever built a macro for Microsoft Excel, you probably used Visual Basic for Applications, or VBA. So how many of you have ever done a macro in Microsoft Excel? Actually coded a macro in Microsoft Excel. Then you used VBA, Visual Basic for Applications. Hand up. Frankly says hand up. Yeah. Fuel says there's a streamer that streams every day making games in VB. Yeah. The thing is, it's not dead. You can absolutely use it. If you already know VB, then go build stuff with it. That's totally fine. But if you're just picking up an application language now, I would pick up C sharp instead. Because again, that's the one that has all the support. That's the one that Microsoft has a ton of tutorials for. Microsoft has wonderful tutorials, but most of them are for C sharp. So if you're going to pick up something new, I would say pick up C sharp. Icefire says, "Oh, I did code a little in VBA. That was helpful." Yeah, I did too. That's kind of how back when I was a data analyst, I coded stuff in VBA. But I got to say, the syntax, the C sharp syntax, and the JavaScript syntax are just a lot easier for me to get my head around. Hey, Ellen, good to see you. Catching up with chat here. Hoshi says, may you say about your programming road? You're always a .NET developer. I'm happy to talk about that. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take a break, and then we're going to finish out the update functionality for the app, and then I'm happy to talk about my past and like where I came from as a developer. Yeah, happy to talk about it. But we'll go ahead and we're going to take a break. We're going to add update functionality, and then we're going to spend the last part of the stream just kind of, I can, yeah, I'll talk about me. You can ask me questions, all that sort of thing. So stick around if you want to hear about that. We'll do that at the very end. Yes, and Hoshi asks, is C Sharp multi-platform? So yeah, C Sharp runs on .NET, which can run on Mac, Linux, and Windows. Fuel, you'll probably know better than I am. Is that just .NET Core that can run on Mac, Linux, and Windows? Does .NET Framework work on Linux and Mac, or is it just Core? I don't remember. Yeah, VBA could be very helpful for certain tasks like that. Absolutely. All right, break time. I will see you back here in 5. When we come back, we're going to add update functionality that's going to allow you to double click on an item, have it pop back here into the box. Then you'll click add again, and it will replace the original entry. And so just like, I don't have the other one running still, but so essentially you'll double click on this item. It'll go back in the box. You can make an edit, and then it will replace whatever was in the box before as soon as you click add again. So that's what we'll do next. Alrighty, 5 minutes. See you back here soon. Okay, folks, we got about a little bit less than a minute left in the break, so get up and stretch. If you've been sitting this entire time, get up and stretch right now if you're able to do so. Get yourself a glass of water, get yourself a snack, whatever you need. Pet your dog, pet your cat, pet your significant other with their permission, of course, and then come on back. There we go. I finally hit the unmute button correctly. That took like 3 tries. So, woohoo, go me. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you all again. Um, so a couple things going on in chat here. I'm just catching up. Hey, Real Satyam. Welcome to the stream. Good to have you here. Hoshi asks, what's the difference between .NET Framework and .NET Core? .NET Framework is older. It is still getting security updates, but it is not, I believe it's not also not being actively developed. A lot of things are built on .NET Framework, so it's not bad to use it. .NET Framework is also bundled with Windows. So every single Windows update that you get is probably going to come also with an update for .NET Framework, which is nice. And so it's you can pretty much tell that everybody who has Windows of a certain age is going to have .NET Framework pre-installed, which can be kind of nice. Again, it's also still getting security updates through like 2029 or something ridiculous. So you can build applications on .NET Framework, or you could use .NET Core, which is a more modern version. And the nice thing about .NET Core is it is actively getting new features. It's actively being developed, and it's agnostic of Windows. So it releases updates on a different cycle than Windows, so you can get them more often. I believe .NET 8 just came out. Windows is having a conference next week. If you're interested in learning more about .NET and what .NET 8 has got going on, I believe there is a virtual conference that you can attend on November 16th, where they're going to talk a lot more about that. And thank you for the follows. We've got Durgal, we've got Renez BG, and we've got Jairus Kin. Thank you all so much for the follows. Really great having you here. Welcome to the stream. Righty. Roberto says, what app are you making? What is it about? This is just a very simple app in C Sharp for folks who haven't ever used C Sharp before to get a little bit of exposure to the language. And to also show folks how to use Visual Studio. So what is Visual Studio? How does it work? What can you do? Get familiar with the basics of the user interface, and also get familiar with the basics of doing design in Visual Studio. So how we can use XAML to create design elements, or how you can use the GUI designer in conjunction with XAML. Oh, come on, show me the, oh, it's because I've got it running. That's why I can't see it. So you won't be able to see the GUI designer while you're running your application. You have to stop it first. Then it'll come back. Forgot I had it running. All right. Yeah, welcome to the stream, Roberto. So, like we talked about before the break, right now we have basic create functionality, we have delete functionality, and in our list here we have read functionality. So the last thing in that acronym that we want to add is update functionality. So let's add some update functionality. Now, as we mentioned before, what I'd like to add now is the ability to double click a name on the list and essentially then have that populate our box with that name so that people can do edits. And then when they click add, it should add the name back to the list and overwrite the old version, right? So if they make an edit, if they change a spelling or something, it should overwrite the old version and replace it in the list. So let's think about how we might want to do that. So let's start small. If I want to make my list box respond to a double click, what do we think I'm going to need to add? What do we think I'm going to need to add to my list box? I want to make it respond to a double click. Any guesses? I want to make my if I want to make my list box, I want to be able to select an item in my list box and make it respond to a double click. What am I going to need to add from a GUI perspective? We'll take it small here. From a user interface perspective, what am I going to need to add to my XAML in order to make my list box respond to a double click thingy? Yes, very close. Yes. So as we did before, right? We were able to add a event handler or an event listener to our buttons, right? To make them respond to a click. Yes, essentially, we're going to need an event handler, event listener to respond and be listening for that particular type of event. Now, very specifically on my list box, I want it to respond to a double click. So for that, I need to add a specific type of listener. So I'm going to go head up here to my list box. And after the name here, I can add a very specific type, which is mouse double click. And we can see as soon as I start typing here, or I could type, for example, I could type double. If I start typing double, it says mouse double click. So I'm going to add that. And then I'm going to create a function to handle that double click. And I'm going to call that list names. This is going to be kind of a long function name, but we're being very specific here. Mouse double click. So that's going to be the name of the function that's going to handle that. And once again, there's a couple different ways I could navigate to this function. I could click on new event handler here, or I could right click and I could say go to definition, and that'll create it for me. There we go. Yes, you were close. You absolutely were close, Mattel. Yep. Yep. Great guesses, everybody. All right, so I'm going to head over there. And when I double click on an item, when I double click on a list item, I essentially want to take it and put it back into the input box, right? I double click on an item. I want to take it from here and I want to put it back into this box. This is actually very easy to do. What do we want to check for first, though? What do we want to check for first? Essentially, we want to check first and make sure that something is selected, right? That I didn't just double click. Yeah, exactly. If the list is not empty, I didn't just double click somewhere, on an empty spot in the list, right? But make sure I actually double clicked on an item. Exactly right. So we're going to say, all right, if list names, which is the name of my list box, selected item, so exactly like we did up here, if that is not null, right? Just the same way we did up here. If that selected item is not null, then we want to put it inside of our input box. Okay, so all right, I'll given the information that we have here on stream, or on screen, sorry, given the information that we have on screen, what value am I going to be setting? So if I want to put this text, into my input box, what is the value that I'm going to set? I'll give you a hint. You can figure it out if you look at our add function up here. If you look at our add function, you can figure out what that text in the input box is called. So what do you think I'm going to put in here? If I want to add the selected item to be the interior text of that input box. Yeah, you're exactly right. Exactly. Yep, both of you. It's going to be text name dot text. And actually, GitHub Copilot is auto completing it for me here. It's basically saying, yeah, text name dot text is going to be equal to whatever item they selected, right? And you can see what we're doing here is we're also ensuring it's a string. We're converting it to a string, so it's valid for that input box. Yeah, you all are exactly right. Good job. All right, so this is going to do part of what we want to do. Going to do part of what we want to do. So let's go ahead and test this. Just make sure this part of it works. All right. The application. There we go. Okay, let's say I add this, but I forgot the E on the end. So we'll add the name. All right. Oh, crud, I forgot the E. I want to edit this. I'm going to double click it. My event listener gets called. It pops it right back into the input box. And I'll go ahead and add an E. Now let's see what happens if I click add. Oh no, that's not what I wanted, right? It's close, but it's not what I wanted. I wanted this to replace this item. So if I keep, trying to edit it, it's going to keep adding more entries, and that's not what I want. So we have to modify our add logic a little bit to say, all right, well, if this is an item that already was on the list, we selected it, we edited it, I want it to overwrite this existing item. But if it's a new item, then it should behave just like it did before. So we got to add a little bit more logic into our add function in order to make this behave properly. Okay? Any questions on this? I know we've gone beyond the tutorial here, so I want to take a quick pause and see if everybody's still kind of following along. This is some extra stuff. This wasn't in the initial tutorial, but I wanted to give this full CRUD functionality. I'm going to hydrate real quick. Okay. But feel free to ask questions at any time. If you're still like, I don't know what's going on, you're allowed to ask at any point. You're not going to interrupt me. Okay, so let's go back up here to our add function and see if we can modify that to have the behavior that we want. So essentially what I want to do here is I still want to check and make sure that there is something in the box, right? That's something I'm always going to check for. I don't want to ever put anything on the list that's blank. Hey, Grizz, good to see you. We're doing C# today. We're just finishing up our app that we're building. Yeah, so essentially I always want to check and make sure. No, it's okay, Grizz. I always want to check and make sure that what's in the box is not blank. So I'm going to leave this alone. That's going to stay. And then the next thing I want to check is to say, hey, is what's in the box something that is also selected in the list? Because that means that's what the user clicked on, right? So essentially, if something is selected in the list and then also in our input box, then that's going to be something that I want to have special behavior for. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to remove this second comparison for now. And I'm going to put a second nested if statement in here. Actually, for now, I'm just going to go ahead and clear this out. Okay. Oops. Okay. So my second if statement is going to say, all right, now we should check and see if the thing that's in our, if there's anything selected in the list box. So we're going to say if list names dot, oh, not that, dot selected, oops, LST names, sorry. If list names dot selected item is not null, then we essentially want to replace the text of the selected item with the edited text. So that's what we want to do here. So we're going to say, we're going to declare a new variable here, and we're going to say selected index. I'll tell you what this is doing in just a second. List names dot selected index. And then we're going to take that selected index and we're going to set that equal to the edited text. and then we're going to clear the selection. So I'll explain, I'll go through this again in just a sec after we get it typed out. Selected item equals no. Okay. So let's talk about what this is doing. First off, we're saying, all right, is there something in the input box? Is there anything in there? Okay, cool. If there is, then is there also something selected in the list box? So that means that we're trying to do an edit, right? We've selected something, we double clicked on it. Now it's in the text box. So here we have some special behavior that's going to replace the text of the selected item with the edit. So what we need to do in order to do that replacement is say, all right, what item in the list box is currently selected? Which one is it? And to do that, we get the index of that item. And if you'll notice, when I declared this variable, I had to give it a type, right? Because again, C# is a typed language. So when I say int, what does that mean? What is a type int? Chris says in Kotlin, we call second statement as if else. Yeah, you can also do if else. If else works in C# as well, just like JavaScript. Mm-hmm. Oh, she says integer. Yep. And what is, in essence, what is an integer? Yeah, but what is it? Yeah, it's Copper Lily said. It's a whole number. Exactly. Yep. It's a whole number. And that makes sense, right? That makes sense why I declared it as an integer, because it's the index for the item in the list. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, those list items in order, just like in an array, they all have an index. And so we want to grab the index of the item that was selected. And then what are we doing? We're taking the text that was typed in, so the edited text, and we're going into the list and we're finding the item at that index. So just this is exactly what you would do in JavaScript, right? Even down to the notation. If you want to find the item at a certain point in an array or whatever, or let's say in an object maybe, you could use array notation and pass a variable in, as long as it's a number, to return that specific item. This is literally the same notation as JavaScript, array notation. We're going into the items in the list, and using array notation, we're able to pin down which specific item it is, and then we're setting the value of that item to the edited text. And then finally, the last thing we're doing is removing the selection from the list. What does the items represent here? Those are the items in our list box. So in our application, we have a list of names in a list box. And so this is just saying, hey, for the items in that list box, find the one at index, whatever, index 0, index 1, index 2, or whatever, and then replace it with this text. Okay? Yeah, a non-fractional number, exactly. So let me know if this doesn't make sense, but this is basically exactly how you do this sort of thing in JavaScript. Finding an item, using array notation to pick a specific item out of the list, and then we're essentially giving it a new value of whatever that edited text is. Okay? Now, as Grizz says, why can we use else if? Yes, we can. We're just about to. So this deals with if we have an editing situation, right? If we're doing an edit. But we also still want to be able to handle the basic add situation. So if nothing is selected, the user has typed in a new value that they want to add to the list. Now our next scenario should handle that. So we can do an else if. Else if we're going to say, hey, all right, if actually the next thing we want to check and say, all right, does the item that they typed in, does it already exist in the list exactly as spelled? So is it identical to something already in the list? So we're going to say, essentially, if, using the bang here, list names dot items dot contains. So if that item is not already in the list, then we want to add it. List names dot items dot add. And then finally, we want to clear the text box. All right, so let's talk about this part. Semicolon, there we go. So what this is doing here is its next thing it's checking to say, all right, is the item that they typed already in the list? If it's not, then go ahead and add it. If it is, then just skip this whole thing and clear the text box. Is items a companion function? Basically, it's just if we look here, if we hover over it, we can basically it's notation for a collection of items. So the list names itself, that's actually the element that we've dragged into our designer window. So that's our GUI element. And here we're specifically, out of all the things involved with that GUI element, we want to specifically refer to the actual items in the list. So see if I do, I think if I click on this one, you can get some more information about it, but it's going to be pretty complicated. So you can click on pretty much any of these things to see the, the underlying code behind them. But essentially all we're really doing here is we're saying, hey, for this list names list box, we want to specifically look at the items in that box and then get more information about them. Does it contain, do any of the items in there contain um, the text that was typed in the box, in our input box? No worries, Hoshi. Good to have you here today. You sleep well also. Good to have you here today, Hoshi. Thanks for joining. All right. So now, hopefully, we're handling all those behavior options that we want to control. So let's save it. Let's try again. See if it does what we want now. So I'm going to add a name. We'll add a few more names. Feel free to suggest any names you want me to add. Oops. And we'll add go. Okay, now let's say I want to capitalize Copper Lily's name. So I'm going to double click on that. We already know that this works. It's going to add it back into the box. Tane, yeah, I need to add Tane. You're right. And so I'm going to capitalize a Copper Lily. Now, what I want to happen is for this to overwrite the previous entry. So now when I click add, what it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, is anything currently selected in the list box? Why, yes, it is. We can see that this value right here is selected. So it's going to say, oh, okay, this is selected and something is typed in the box. So as soon as I click add, it's going to replace whatever's at that selected index with this. Yeah, good callback, Tane. All right, we'll click add. Yay, it works. But now I can still add something new like Tane, and that will work as well. And I can still delete. Okay. New Tane, yeah. Celery man. All right. So that is full crud functionality, my friends. Any questions? Questions on what we did here? Or if you want me to go over any of the functions again, or how the logic works and what it's doing. Yes, indeed. Chef's kiss. Also, too, I'm going to do a quick check here. Chat was going pretty fast there for a while. Just want to make sure I didn't miss any subscribers because I actually have a new custom alert that I made. So if there was any subscribers that I missed. Oh, and Real Satyam, yes, hello. I forget if I said hello to you. Welcome to the stream. But the only place I can see subscribers is like in the chat itself for some reason. So because which is broken. Yeah. So scrolling up, just making sure I didn't miss anybody because I have a custom manual alert that I will trigger for you. Once again with the logic. Okay, no problem. We'll go over that in just a sec. All right, cool. Looks like I didn't miss anybody. That's good. All right, let's talk about the logic again. So do you want to see which logic do you want to see, Grizz? Do you want to see the well, okay, let's talk through it all together. And actually, I'm going to have it running while I do that so we can have a visual because I think that's helpful. All right. So we'll add a few names again. I shouldn't have stopped it in the first place. Rufio. And we'll do Tane. There we go. Okay. So what I want to do, what I want to happen is basically when I type a brand new name in the input box, I want it to just add it to the list. However, if I double click on a name, I want it to overwrite the old name with the new one or whatever edits I made. I want that to do an overwrite instead. So if I didn't have that logic, it would just add it to the end of the list, right, as a new entry. But I don't want that. I want it to overwrite the old one, just like that. And then if I click on something to delete, I want to delete it. Okay, so how are we going to handle that? Just the add and the edit part. Well, the first thing that we did is we added an event listener to the list itself. Because if I have something on the list and I double click it, the first thing that I want to happen is I want that item, the text of that item to go into the input box for editing. Okay, so that's our first thing. We have this event listener here. It's called list names mouse double click, and it's literally listening for a double click. When that happens, it makes sure that I've actually selected something. So in this case, I've selected Tane. So it says, all right, if selected item is not null, then populate the text of our input box right here with whatever item was selected, making sure it's a string. So taking this selected item and putting it as the value of the text in our input box. So that's part one. Part two is making sure that when I click add, it's going to overwrite the existing entry rather than adding a new one. That's part two. So what I did there is modify the existing logic for that add name event handler to basically figure out which scenario we've got going on. Am I adding something new or am I editing something existing? So the very first thing we do is we say, all right, I don't want to do anything if this box is entirely empty, right? I don't want to ever add an empty item to my list. So the first thing we check just to get that out of the way is be like, hey, is there something in the box? If that is not, see that we've got the little bang there. If it's not null or white space inside of our input box, then we go on to the rest of the logic. The next thing we check for to say, all right, are we in an edit scenario? Are we trying to edit something? So we say, all right, now let's see, is there something currently selected in our list box? If list names.selected item is not null, then we want to replace the text of the selected item with the edited text from the input box. Okay? So now we're saying, all right, I want to figure out which item I'm supposed to be replacing. And I can do that by getting the index of the selected item. So just like in an array, right? You have indexes. I could say, array and then, bracket 0, and that would get me the first item in that array. Or I could say array bracket 1, and that would get me the second item in the array. We can do the exact same thing here. We can say, all right, get me the index of whatever item is currently selected. So what would be the index? What would be the index of the item that I have currently selected here in my list box? What would be the value of that index or the contents of this variable here? What's that value? Ooh, and thank you for the follow, Elmanson. Thank you so much. Good to have you here. Have Deb says 3. Yeah, so let's double check that. Let's see if that's right. We start at 0, right? That's how indexes work and how arrays work. We start at 0, 1, 2, 3. Yes, so you're exactly right, Kev Dev. Good to see you, by the way, coming in hot with the right answer. I love it. Yeah, so our index here that we've selected is 3. So I'm storing that in a variable called selected index. Now, what I want to do is take whatever's in my input box and assign it as the value of the item at that index. So I can do that by saying, all right, now let's go back to the list box, go into the list of items right here. Again, this is referencing the actual list of items that are in our list box, and then pass in that value of 3. So list names dot items value 3 is right here. And I'm going to set that equal to whatever I typed in the box. In this case, it's celery man. And then finally, I'm going to deselect anything in the box. So when I do that, that's exactly what happens. Okay? Now, what if it's not an edit situation? So we covered that, right? The first thing we check to say, all right, if it's an edit situation, then do this. If it's not, I'm going to assume we're adding a new item. So if nothing is selected in the list here on the left, I'm going to assume we're adding a brand new item. So last thing we're going to check and say, all right, I want to make sure that this new item I'm adding isn't already on the list. If it's not already on the list, we're just going to go ahead and add it. And it's going to be, a new item here. If it is already on the list, then don't do anything. Just clear the box. Don't add anything new. Okay? So, Grizz, does that help? Walking through the logic there? Exclusive, welcome to the stream. They say, why don't you reverse the if statement on line 30? So essentially what we're doing here is we're just checking for reverse the if statement. Can you give me an example of what you mean there? I'm just curious. So essentially we don't want to execute any of this if the text box is empty. So if we've double clicked on something here and I've just deleted everything out of it, I don't want to do anything. That's why we're doing that check first. Right? Because I don't want anything to happen if I just clear that box. You can see I'm clicking add here and nothing's happening. That's exactly what we want. Because I don't want to add anything. I don't want to add anything empty strings to my list. Okay? That's why we're doing that. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. So they're just saying, hey, you could also do it if string dot is null or white space, then just do an empty return and exit the if statement. Yeah, and that's valid too. You could do that. You could get rid of the bang. You could get rid of the bang and just return, just close out of the if statement entirely and then do an else and then proceed if there, is something in the box. No, I see what you're saying, exclusive. Absolutely. Essentially what I was doing here by using the bang was I'm trying to show folks about the similarities between C# and JavaScript, but the way you reference is absolutely valid also. And you're right that using the bang as a not can sometimes trip people up when you're reading it. Absolutely agree. Yep. Absolutely agree. All right, so Grizz, did that explanation help you at all? Can't hear the word bang without thinking about Ricky Martin. I don't know. I just love saying bang and bash. Those are fun. And we were just talking about in my last term, we were just talking about, if you see this symbol, like what do you call it, right? Like, because the name of the language is C#, and so they're using that to denote sharp. But you could also call it a hashtag. You could call it a pound sign. You could call it a octothorpe. So there's a lot of different ways to pronounce this particular symbol. It is interesting that C# is named that way after like musical notation. If you're not familiar in musical notation, you'll use that symbol as a sharp. Basically, you're moving up a half step in a note. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting the way they named it. Pound sign? Yeah. If you're of a certain, if you maybe used to use like touch tone phones growing up, like the old button phones with the handset, you probably knew that as a pound sign because a lot of times phone numbers would, you dial and you say, hit pound for, whatever for the operator. Yeah. I'm not trying to, put you at a certain age, Elmonson. I'm just saying that's how I grew up was hearing that as pound sign. I grew up before the hashtag was a thing. Octothorpe sounds like a comic book villain. Yeah, it's a great name. Buttons. I grew up with dolls. Yeah, so Bombaloni, I actually did too. My first phone that I learned how to use as a kid, like our home phone was a rotary dial. Um, yeah, it was really cool. It was a lot of fun. But my mom had to tell me like, when you're a little kid, like a rotary dial that you can stick your finger in and like, make it spin, like that was the coolest thing ever when you're like 4. And so she had to really like be like, you do not get to mess with this. You do not get to play with the phone. Because it was actually a working phone. So yeah, rotary phones. Yep, exactly. We had one of those when I was a kid, and I wanted to play with it so bad. The beeper, the touch tone phone we replaced it with wasn't nearly as fun. Whenever she did let me dial a number, I always used to get so excited. Nobody would want to learn C flat. Yeah, exactly. That doesn't sound nearly as cool. And that would be a lot harder to write. Is there even like there's nothing like if I wanted to, I can write C sharp. I could write like the word C sharp, but using a standard keyboard, but there's no flat symbol on standard keyboards unless you've got one for musical notation. Alrighty. Well, hopefully that logic made sense when we went through it again, and maybe helped somebody else out there too that was kind of struggling with it also. So, Grizz, I appreciate you asking the question and wanting us to go through it again because if you had that question, then probably at least one other person out there also had that question. So I really appreciate that. Um, Always very helpful. So that's about it for the actual application. Now I always like at the end, or well, toward the end of my streams, I always like to spend a little time if I have time. I like to spend some time just doing kind of Q&A, like answering questions. You can ask stuff about me. I did promise earlier that I was going to talk about kind of my background and who I am and how I got here, what I do, that kind of thing. So I'm happy to talk about that. Also happy to answer any of the questions or, topics that you all want to see. Oh, good. So Renate says they were able to follow along today with Visual Studio 2019 and .NET 5.0 without any problems. Yeah, if you're building something simple like this, no matter what version of Visual Studio you have, you should be able to follow along. And also, Microsoft has a lot of fantastic tutorials and fantastic documentation for C Sharp, for building Windows applications, for publishing Windows applications. Oh, and the last thing I want to talk about here on this application is that Visual Studio, just like VS Code, also has Git integration and GitHub integration. So over here on the right side of your screen, you should have a little toolbar for Git changes. And so you can create a Git repository. You can, do commits. If I pull up the finished version here, I actually push to Git. So the repo that I have, I push to Git, um, essentially using this interface right here. Now, I do know how to do it with a command line. I do that all the time, but there is a built-in visual Git interface right here in Visual Studio. So, it shows you changes, and I can actually do a commit right now. So I'll just say this is for the added update capabilities, abilities. And so we can see I've got my changes here. I can go ahead and stage them, and then I'll go ahead and commit them. And that's going to do a local commit first, and then I can push them up to GitHub. So we'll commit. There we go. And now I can click this little up arrow and push them. And then if we go back over to that's not it. Where is it? I have to click the link. Go. Yeah, there we can see it actually it pushed up to GitHub. So that's kind of convenient. Might be faster in the command line. If you're good with the command line, I think it's faster than using the GUI, but it works pretty well. Yeah, working with the GUI is a nice change. Yeah. Um, and there is a GUI in VS Code as well. A lot of us here probably don't use it, but for example, as I've been teaching my coworkers about Git, a lot of them are less comfortable with the command line, and so I've been teaching them how to use the GUI instead. I'm planning on doing a lesson for them on the command line, but for now, the GUI is about their threshold that they're willing to tolerate. The popcorn lady was recording the told the time. Oh, no worries, Copper Lily. I'm glad you got it working. That's awesome. Leo says the power went out. Oh my goodness. Did we connect to a database? No, we're not connecting to a database with this today. This app is very simple. We're just storing everything locally, like within the application. I think it's not no cloud storage today. Is C sharp good for both the front end and back end of a web application? I'm more as far as web apps go. I'm going to build them in JavaScript. But specifically for like building desktop applications, then I'm going to use C sharp. However, you can absolutely build different types of applications using C sharp. There's We were just talking earlier about what's that called, Maui. You can use .NET Maui to build like cross-platform applications. And there's another kind of a React-like framework that Blazor is kind of like React. You can also build applications, web applications with. Git on command line is a superpower. It's so much faster than using the GUI. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, Git on command line is much faster than the GUI. But for those, sometimes it's nice to use a GUI. My personal preference is command line, but like I said, a lot of my coworkers, they want to use the GUI. Kunj says, "Hey, first time in your stream, welcome. Good to have you here. Stream is almost over. Please tell me, when are you planning on another C sharp session? I want to learn C sharp for my job." Well, if you want to learn C sharp for your job, I would highly recommend. Microsoft has some fantastic tutorials. In fact, we actually followed one today. Let me pull it back up. I'll link you to those. And again, you can get started yourself using these tutorials. They're really good. Um, Microsoft really wants to teach people how to use C sharp. So tons of stuff out there. I'll give you the tutorial we used today. You should be able to follow it on your own pretty easily. I'll put it in chat here. There you go. Yeah, and there's lots of other resources out there for learning to code in general, such as Free Code Camp or 100 Devs. But if you specifically want to learn C sharp, check out that site that I just shared in chat. Tons of tutorials, whatever framework you want to learn, especially if you want to learn Visual Studio. It's pretty great for that. Hi, Mattel. Good to have you here. RDT says, "Can't believe that you haven't been sponsored yet with all you've done." I've actually had a couple of folks reach out to want to sponsor me. But my thing is that I want it to be a certain type of sponsor. I want it to be, number one, I want whoever decides to sponsor me, they need to have a free tier. So it needs to be something that is freely available, that there's no paywall. Folks shouldn't have to pay. If I'm gonna like hype up something on my stream, or put something out there on my stream for exposure, I want it to be at least have a free tier that people can get into for free and try it out without having to pay for it. And then also it should be like non-scummy, like not trying to it can be a company that's out to make a profit, but it shouldn't be something that is trying to force people into a particular way of developing or a particular box. It should be something that's free and flexible for everybody to use. So I have had a couple of people approach me, but they didn't meet those criteria. So I said no. Yeah. So that's pretty important to me. Yeah. And also too, the great thing is, like I'm not making my living from streaming, so I can afford to be a bit particular. And I don't begrudge anybody. Like if people are, streaming to feed their family, then like man, take whatever sponsorships you want. But I'm not, so I have that privilege of being a little more picky with the folks that I want to sponsor me. Frankly says an idea to do a talk on idea to do a talk on is how to make an app that can update self or on demand. Actually, yeah, I've built apps that could do that. Some of the desktop apps that I build for work, um, that's actually fairly easy to do. Now, we won't walk through the whole process here because I don't have everything that we do that, but I will tell you how to do it and you can read about it yourself. I will tell you exactly what that is and how to implement that. So if we head back over to our solution explorer, let's say I was done with this application and I wanted to publish it. Um, Actually, I'm going to go back to this one with the bigger font. I'm going to head to my solution explorer. If I right click on this, you'll notice that one of the options is publish. And when you publish, if you want to enable things like auto update, you're going to want to use something called Click Once. Click Once is a built in publishing framework that exists in Visual Studio that allows you to do all those sorts of things. It allows you to publish to a website, it allows you to configure like app versions. It allows you to have the app check for updates, like while it's offline or when the user first opens the app, it can check for updates and not allow the app to open until those updates are installed. Um, and I actually that's what I've done for the apps that I build for work because if I add a new feature, I don't want people using an old version of it, right? I want it to be the current version. And so I would suggest reading up on Click Once and how you can use that to publish apps to the web. You can publish them to like a shared drive. Like, for example, the apps that I build for work, I don't publish those to the web because they're internal. Um, so we have a LAN, we have a shared drive where that everybody can access. I publish them locally to that LAN. And then as soon as I have an update, all I need to do is click publish again. And then like it's like 2 clicks and then that app is boop, updated. And then as soon as the user opens it again, it says, "Hey, there's an update available," and it stalls it, and then the app opens for. So yes, that is built into Visual Studio, right here in the Publish menu, and called Click Once. So that's what I would recommend. Microsoft again has some fantastic tutorials on Click Once and how to use it. I would really suggest reading those because that's how I learned how to use it. And it literally takes you through step by step. Here's what you do. First one's free, Microsoft. Yeah. No, Microsoft is brilliant with their strategy, honestly. They make amazing tools available for free. They get you into their ecosystem, and then, then at the enterprise level, they charge an arm and a leg. And I agree with that business model, right? Don't charge the little guy. Don't charge the independent developer. Don't charge the individual. Let them have it for free. And then, charge the big corporations that can afford it and like charge them a lot. So I very much agree with their business model. Thanks, Bud Chat. No worries, Bombaloni. Click once sounds so powerful. It is very good. And so, for example, we're talking about like versions. Um, yeah. Get out of that. Oops, I popped out the window. Come on back. All right, review the. I want to go to project. There we go. I want to go to project, and so you can do things like you can configure the project. You can set the like the properties of it. And so, for example, in like if I go to project and then properties, I can do things like set how the what the publish is going to look like. I can set version numbers. Let's see, where is version? You can set the license. So, for example, like if you want to set it to like the MIT license, open source, you can set it this here. How it behaves when you run it, all sorts of things. Yeah, actually, it may not show the version thing until after it's published. I don't remember. But tons of options you can set when you bundle this thing for actual release. Frankly says, cool, I did not know about Click Once, but I guess it ties you to Microsoft Server World. Not even a server, really. I mean, it just bundles it for use. You can publish, like I said, you can publish it locally without ever publishing it out to the web or using Azure or anything like that. This doesn't have anything to do with Azure or anything like that. It's really just bundling it for you with like all the licensing, the versions, all the packages that you need, that kind of thing. Yeah, you can set it to MIT license. If you look at the repo that I put out there, I have that set to MIT license. Um, and I did that using Visual Studio. I just assigned it an MIT license for open source. Yep. So I would highly recommend that if you do build a Windows app or whatever, just use click once and publish it. Super easy. You can publish it to the web. You can publish it to a LAN drive. Doesn't matter where. Makes it super easy. Yeah, permissive licenses. Woo. Yep. All right. So that was essentially the last thing that I kind of wanted to show you with this application was how you can use Git and how you can publish. Um, and yeah, any other questions about this? Otherwise, any questions for me, just like personally or whatever. Questions about me, where I came from, what I'm doing. I know it was asked earlier, could I talk about my background? Good. I'm glad it's helpful. Yeah. Well, and I found Click once to be very helpful because actually the way that, like I mentioned, there was a person that built a lot of the utility apps that I use for work. Well, he had started building stuff back before like all these little helpful tools existed, right? So no, I'm not throwing any shade on him, but he was doing all the packaging and deployment and like versioning. He was doing all of that manually, like it was crazy manually. Like you were going and you were editing like registry files. It was wild. And then I was like, wait, isn't there's got to be something like built in to they can just handle all this stuff. And so I did some looking around and I was like, oh yeah, there is. It can just do all this stuff but manually, no problem, or sorry, automatically, no problem. So I started using that and it's great. Robodom says, outside of work hours, do you spend time learning stuff on your own? So most of what I do for work, so if any of you didn't know, my day job, what I get paid for, is I am a backend developer specifically working with SQL. So I build ETL pipelines with SQL. I work for a major university, and I maintain their data warehouse. So it's just a giant collection of relational databases. Um, and so primarily what I do at work is SQL. Now I get to do fun stuff such as building little apps in C sharp and that kind of thing. But really, the main purpose of my job is working with SQL and building ETL pipelines. So when you ask, do you spend time learning stuff on your own? I absolutely do, because all the web development stuff I've learned, JavaScript, React, all that stuff, I don't get paid for any of that. That has nothing to do with my day job at all. Anything with 100 devs, anything 100 devs related, that's all extracurricular. So I spend tons of time learning stuff on my own because all the web development is just for funsies, really. Yeah. Mitron says, you look like a man. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. Quadchat says, so you can change my grades. Um, I guess, technically. I mean, if it's in a database table somewhere, then it is possible to change one's grades. However, I would never do that to anybody at my actual employer. But yeah, I mean, if something's written inside of a database table, then yeah, it can be changed. Absolutely. Just write an update statement, change that 2.0 GPA to a 3.9 update. That would, of course, get me in a lot of trouble, so I wouldn't do it. But Leo says, "What activity do you like doing outside of coding?" I like hanging out with my dog. I like playing video games. Um, let's see. Yeah, I mean, dog, video games. I own my own house, so there's a lot of home maintenance involved with that. That's the crappy thing about not renting anymore. So yeah, home maintenance, that sort of thing. I'm a pretty low key person, honestly. Fostering kittens, yeah, I do that a lot as well. Not so much now that the cold weather has hit. Dr. Moda says, "How do you deal with cat and dog hair?" Well, I'm lucky enough that my dog does not shed. So my dog is a poodle, and poodles don't shed. So I don't got to deal with any hair. And my foster kittens, they're very tiny, so they have very tiny little coats, so they don't shed very much either. I just do a lot of laundry with them, and they stay in one little area. So yeah, no cat hair problems for me or dog hair problems because I got a non-shedding dog. Any other questions? What countries have you traveled for business or fun? Yeah, so I've been to France, Italy, Greece, the UK. Briefly spent the night in an airport in Germany. Yeah, I think that's about it. I'm planning to go to Canada, maybe in the winter or spring once I get my new passport. I've never been to Canada, but I live in the US, obviously. But yeah, I've never been to Canada, so I'm planning to go up there soon. No kitten cam right now. No, unfortunately. France sounds great. Yeah, it was really pretty. We played soccer with a bunch of kids there. It was really fun. I liked Italy the best though, and I also love the UK. I've been there twice. So. Quad Chat says, "Why did software engineering come on your radar? What age or scenario?" Yeah. So I do not have a CS degree. I always put that out first because people are like, "Oh, well, you must have a CS degree." Nope, absolutely not. Um, I grew up in a rural area. I didn't even like a lot of folks who get into software engineering were doing like Neopets and like MySpace, when they were younger, and so they got some experience doing HTML and you know I don't know, markup languages and CSS and basic editing and that kind of thing. I didn't have any of that. We really didn't have internet or well, we had internet, but it was the slowest possible dial up. So couldn't really even view images, much less do any cool stuff like, a MySpace page. So it was really just text only internet for me. So I didn't do any coding as a kid. My high school was very small and rural. So we learned how to type like on a keyboard, but that was it. We didn't learn any other computer skills. There weren't the resources for it. So no coding classes or anything like that in high school. In college, I tried to take one coding class. It was a Java coding class, and it sucked, and I hated it. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand the way it was taught. We had to, for exams, we had to write code by hand on notebook paper, which absolutely sucks and teaches you nothing. Um, so I hated that class. Just about failed it except for the group projects. The group projects saved me. I was that person in the group that was like bringing coffee and candy to the group because I just couldn't contribute anything else. Um, and so, yeah, I didn't do any coding all the way through college. But luckily, I kind of like landed in a role out of college where I was doing data analytics. And so data analytics is kind of a sister to being a developer, right? Because if you're doing data analytics, you have to understand logic. You have to understand data sources. You have to be able to connect to various data sources. You have to get really good at Excel and macros and all those kind of, dev adjacent type things. And so I started to learn how to use databases, how to use Excel, how to build macros, how to build dashboards, how logic works, and that kind of thing. And then, but I had a job with a health insurance company. And if you're in the US, you know that health insurance companies are predatory beasts that are just straight up evil. Sorry if anybody works at a health insurance company out there. Make your money, make your living. That's okay. But it was not for me. Yeah. So I left within about a year there. And then I got a job working at a e-commerce company, not Amazon, someplace else. I was on the production area of the e-commerce company, and so I was an operations manager for them. And the entire operation of the company was basically run on a series of SQL, like SQL triggers and SQL databases. So I had to get real good with SQL real fast. Um, Luckily, my manager is like a savant at SQL. He's so good, and so he taught me a lot about SQL and just databases in general. But at the time, I still wasn't really developing anything. I was just basically doing a lot of select queries and like basic inserts and updates um, because I didn't think I was allowed to be a developer. Like, honestly, I didn't think I was allowed to be a developer because I didn't have a piece of paper that says you are, you know, you have a computer science degree. So I thought I wasn't allowed to do that stuff. And also I didn't have any like tech role models, especially who were women. Um, Growing up, I didn't know any women in STEM, like, or any women in tech specifically. Didn't know any women in tech. Didn't really have any role models who weren't fictional in that field. And so I just didn't think that was a thing I could do. And so then after that, I kept going into analytics. I got a job at a university doing data analytics in finance. Figured out I really, really don't like finance. I'm not a fan. I do not like accounting. I do not like finance, but I was doing analytics for them. Um, but what I figured out is I didn't like finance, but I liked the software part. I was like, I want to learn more about, okay, what software are we using? How does it work? Can we develop better analytics tools? Like, can I work with the developers on that? Can I help troubleshoot? Can I do technical support? Like all those things. And then finally, at that same university, a senior developer position came open on the SQL team, like on the data warehouse team. And it was a senior role, and I had never been a dev before. And my coworker was like, "Why didn't you apply for that role?" And I'm like, "Ha, hell no, absolutely not. What are you talking about? Like, man, I can't be a dev. I don't have a CS degree. What are you on about?" Um, but I was like, you know what? Like, what's the harm if I do? Like, it's not going to hurt me when I get rejected. Inevitably, it's not going to cause any problems, right? Like, all right, fine. So I applied and I practiced my interview soft skills a lot. Like, I stood in front of a mirror and I asked myself all those common like soft interview questions over and over and over again until I could just roll them off my tongue. And I got the job. At that point, I hadn't used SQL in 3 years. Like all the data analytics I'd been doing were from like GUI tools and in Excel. So I got the job and I was like, oh my God, what did I do? Like, why the frick did they hire me? And so I had mad imposter syndrome, and that's how I got involved in 100 Devs. And then I started, you know, actually embracing the role, having fun learning how to develop stuff, having fun learning languages, realizing that, yeah, I can do this if I don't have a piece of paper that says computer science on it. Anybody can do this stuff if you have the passion for it. And I do. So, yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. Now I got to catch up with chat because y'all have been blowing up. Watch Chat says I'm 90 miles from Canada. Oh, that's awesome. Leo says, where in the US are you located? I'm in the Midwest. Yeah, so the Midwest, the Great Lakes area. Italy is beautiful. It is. Code on notebook paper, yeah. Jump directly to Java. Yeah, I just didn't know any better. Yeah, the first thing I tried was Java, which is probably a mistake. But I mean, if they're offering this class as a beginner class to students, like that's a mistake on the college's part, right? Like they shouldn't be offering that kind of stuff to like just beginners. Like they should be those curriculums should be curated to funnel people into programming to get them excited about coding rather than trying to make it like a weed out type scenario. Those I don't know. I feel like the curriculum was badly structured, offering that kind of thing as a beginner class because I thought it was, and I took it, and it sucked. Yeah, it was Java on paper. Exactly, it was. No laptops, nothing. You wrote it out on notebook paper. Oh, you like spreadsheets too? Yeah, I love Excel. I still do. I don't get to use it nearly as much as I would like to, but I could talk for hours about how awesome Excel is and all the cool things you could do with it. And I still want to do a stream someday on like cool stuff in Excel and how you use it because it's so cool. Altu says my APCS class was the same way, but the AP exam was on paper back then, so I guess it made sense in that regard. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like like I was in that class in like I don't know 2013 ish. I don't know the exact year, but yeah, I was like 2013. Like laptops were a thing. Like we could have done it on laptops or gone to a computer lab and had our exam, but nope, paper. Microsoft Office, Visual Studio, VS Code are the best Microsoft projects. Yeah, they're pretty good. Frankly says any specific career ambitions at the moment. Yeah. So I love my job actually. I absolutely do love it. Um, I would like to be making more money, to be real. And also, I feel like my don't. I feel like my current job doesn't really. Um, excuse me. My current job doesn't really reflect like the depth of my current skills. I feel like I'm a lot more multifaceted now than I was a few years ago, and so it'd be cool to have a role that you know flexes that a little bit more. Um, so yeah, eventually I'd like to, I love data in like I love working with data warehouses, working with the back end, but it'd be cool to have a role that's a little bit more flexible in that regard. Um, is a little bit of a higher level role. But I do love my job legitimately. It's great. I love my coworkers. They're really great. I can take time off whenever I want. I'm 100% remote. So, I mean, it is pretty good. But if the right thing came along, I would take it. So if anybody out there in chat has somebody that they're like, ooh, you might be a good candidate for my friend's company or my company or whatever, I'm happy to talk to you about the role. So hit me up on LinkedIn, hit me up on Discord, wherever. We can set up a coffee chat. Shooting for backend eventually, quad shot. Yeah, that's awesome. I love the backend. It's great. Yeah, and an interview where you get the answer of no at the end can also be a great personal inventory. Certainly. I've had that. Yep, that happened. Hey, Deep Elements, good to see you. Welcome to the stream. Leo says, would you take suggestions for what we could work on here? Yes, I will say that, like, as far as my streams go, Leon 100 Devs is going to be starting a like a freelancing crash course here pretty soon. So I'm probably going to be tailoring my streams around that. So we're probably going to be doing like more like static client websites and that kind of thing for the next few weeks, maybe until the end of the year. That doesn't mean it's going to be exclusively that, but I do tailor my streams around what 100 Devs is doing, and I want to help folks build out, their portfolio, client templates, get freelancing clients, that kind of thing. So, I mean, but you're welcome to make a suggestion. It just may not be in the immediate future that we do it. Midwesterners for the win! Yeah, everybody forgets about us. Job on paper. Did you use one of those 4-color pens? No, just a regular old pen. It sucked. They had you practice whiteboarding. Essentially, yeah, but worse. Because it wasn't even allowed to be like pseudocode. It had to be like completely like correct code, like graded code on paper. It was bad. Spreadsheet fan here. I need new cats, macro, and comma. That's a good one. Leo says, join the hunt then. I kind of am. Yeah. Software firms just sleep on the Midwest. I agree. Now that everybody's remote, like, where does it matter where you live? Some people get so good at their job that the company won't promote them to another more well-paying role. In that case, quit the company. Absolutely agree. Yep. Fortunately, I still do like I am still growing in my current role, but if I ever hit the ceiling, I would absolutely be out. Is C sharp good if in future I want to become 3D environment artist, working with Unity or Unreal Engine, because that's where I want to go in the long term. I think you should. I really think that like any C-based language is probably a decent place to start because you could transition really easily into other C syntax languages that way. Um, I mean, I won't say in particular that any language is good or bad. I think you have a lot of options with C sharp because again, it's heavily supported by Microsoft. Um, exactly correct code on paper. Yeah, yeah. I'm not kidding, Robodom. Yeah, but yeah, I think any C-based language is good to start with. As far as the best languages for game development, I I don't really do game dev, but if anybody in chat wants to chime in for the most common game dev languages, feel free to do so. Because yeah, I don't do game dev, but I know that you can do game dev in C sharp. I don't know if it's the best. C++. Okay. Scripts are written in a special language that Unity can understand, and it's through this language that we can talk to the engine. All right. The language that's used in Unity is called C sharp. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All the languages that Unity operates with are object-oriented scripting languages. Sure. Okay. And C sharp. Learn C sharp then. or C++, either one. But I mean, a C syntax language, you should be fine. Unity uses C sharp. Okay, cool. Yeah, and Unity did do some scummy stuff lately. I think they walked that back, fortunately. All right, I've got about 10 minutes, I think, or 15 minutes before I'm gonna have to go and I have an appointment to get a flu shot. Woohoo! So I'll have to get ready for that and go do it. But I've got about 15 minutes. So any other questions for me? I do have work tomorrow. Yeah, this may be a mistake, but I want to get the shot in before I like go do Thanksgiving stuff. Oh, Quadchat says, "How is your neighbor? She needed you last time." Yes, during the last stream, my neighbor called me and wanted me to come over. She is fine. She actually wanted to tell me that she's going to be moving soon. So, yeah, she just wanted to tell me that and you know let me know that was coming. But no, she was fine. Got my shots the other day. Yay! You had flu, COVID, and shingles last week all at the same time. I was in bed 3 days, fever for full 24 hours. Oh my goodness, that sucks. Wow. Yeah, yeah. I'm hoping to not have that happen. Hence why I've got the shot schedule. Not recommend all three. Jeez. Wow. I was warned but stubborn. Uh, Wait, are you talking about you actually got you got those like or did the shots? You got all three of the shots at once. I need to know the answer to this. Oh, you got all the shots at once. Okay. Well, I'm getting two. I'm getting COVID and flu, so we'll see how that goes. Might be dead tomorrow. I don't know. See. Oh, Robbo says, not sure if you answered my question earlier, but is it difficult to schedule time to practice coding outside of normal work hours? Um, yeah, so as far as time goes, I am pretty like I have the privilege of being free in that I don't have, children or anything like that that is a mandatory time spend outside of work. So I do have the freedom to kind of pursue what I want outside of work, what I want to do. So for me, it's not as big of a challenge as it is for a lot of people to find time to, do stuff and learn new things and explore things. So I'm lucky in that way and privileged in that way. Um, but it is sometimes a challenge, right? Because I have to maintain my house and handle all those things that come with being an adult. So sometimes it's harder than others, but I do manage to have a fair amount of time to pursue these types of things. And so that's why what I like to do is I like to I don't know, hack through the bushes, right? I'm hacking through the jungle with my machete, and then I turn around here on stream and I lead you down the path that I cut through with my machete, right? Like so, I know that I have more time than a lot of folks out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut down all the hard stuff and then try to come here on stream and walk you down that easier path through the jungle. So that's why I do that. Why I've kept doing that. Frankly says, how much do you work from home? I am 100% remote at my job. So when COVID hit, the university that I work for, they were basically like, hey, people are able to actually get work done when they're at home. Like, how crazy is that? And then the university also said, hey, we've got a bunch of leases on a bunch of office buildings that cost a lot of money. Why don't we just not do that anymore? And so they basically just failed on all their leases, and so I don't even have an office to go back to, even if I wanted to. Like they just were like, nope, we're out, boop, and got rid of a bunch of external office space that they were leasing out for $1 bajillion. And yeah, I'm 100% remote. Yeah, and some folks get a lot of benefit from doing calendaring. Yeah, I'm not so great at that, but it is helpful for a lot of people. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. You can put yourself on do not disturb, all those types of things. Yep. Lovely path you carved with your machete. I try to make it that way. Hey, people are more efficient when we don't have pointless meetings in politics. Well, I mean, we still have some of that stuff, except it's over Teams instead of in person. But one of the biggest things that I've benefited from working from home is the lack of like pop-ins. Because when I worked in a cubicle, so I just this year I was diagnosed with ADHD, the inattentive type. So not the hyperactive type, but the inattentive type, and so um, that made it really hard for me to like maintain focus. So my focus would get broken really easily. And so when I was in a cubicle, you always have like those little conversations going on, like, in one cubicle over, Cindy is talking about her knee surgery, or I don't know, her dog has a weird rash, and you just like it's in your ear, and you're just like, ah, man. Or then you'd have people coming up to your cubicle and like, knock, knock, can I just bug you for a second? And I'm like, oh man, it's going to take me 30 minutes to get my focus back, stuff like that. And so that's my favorite thing about working from home is the concentration. And so like somebody can send me a Teams message, right? But I don't have to answer it like immediately. I can let it just sit there for a minute while I finish up whatever I'm doing. Whereas if you're in a cubicle, somebody pops in and you're like, well, guess I'm doing this now. So I found that helpful. Core, the software explorer. I like that. Working in pajamas. That is true. Yes. My dress is a lot. I used to have to wear business, like I used to have to wear business casual to work. Like we weren't allowed to dress down because I worked in the same building as like some executives, and they didn't want to see anybody in casual wear, and so I had to wear like slacks and fancy shoes and like a nice blouse every day, and I didn't like it. So now I just wear a t-shirt and jeans all the time, and I'm pretty happy with that. Inattentive HD, might look up the information about that. Yes. So ADHD is not classified in two types: hyperactive and inattentive. A lot of women present as the inattentive type, although men can as well. It's basically just a lot of the same symptoms, except you're not hyperactive. Auditory streams cancel all processing for me. Yeah. Yep. So I was professionally evaluated by a professional team for several hours, and that was the determination, and it's been accurate so far. I'm currently properly medicated, which has helped a lot. And so yeah, look up getting evaluated if you're potentially concerned about that kind of thing. Never worked as hard as when I did from home. Required a different discipline to learn. Yeah, yeah, it's a lot harder for some people than it is for others. For me, I took to it like a fish to water, but some folks really struggle working from home because they need like that social charge from other people, or that sort of collaborative spirit that it's harder to get when you're at home. I totally understand that. Frankly says, how many hours of video slash Teams desk meeting do they require per week on average? Yeah, we're in the middle of like a big multi-year project right now, so we do have like scheduled weekly meetings with our customers. I usually have about an hour or 2 hours a day that are just meetings of various types. I mean, just on average. I'm not talking every single day, but like average between 1 to 2 hours every day that it's meetings. So just part of it. COVID era, stay home alone. Me, hell yes, finally. Yeah, I was kind of that way too. Like, yes, this is how I live. I don't miss scrums. Yeah, we switched to agile development in our IT organization recently, and I like agile. I think it works great. I like Kanban, I like sprints, all those things. But the one thing my team was like, hell no, was daily stand ups. So we don't do daily stand ups. We do them once a week because my team was like, nope, not doing that. Yeah, agile is pretty great when it's implemented well and when it's implemented flexibly to meet the needs of your team. It's been huge. It's been a big helpful thing for our entire process because I work with a fairly large team. I work with a team of we have 7 or 8 developers now, like on our team. We're all doing like the same thing. So we got to stay in sync with each other. We got to know what other people are working on. It's we got to be flexible and we got to be agile. And so, yeah, agile development has been a big plus for us. Having that Kanban board with everybody's stuff on it, you can help. You can jump in and help other people. You know exactly where you're at in the sprint, how much time you have to get something done. It works really well. Yeah, I've been in an environment that did daily stand ups, and yeah, it's really easy to do them badly. So, yep, totally get that. Yeah, Robodom, you're right. Agile is hard to maintain if you don't have like a dedicated people or like person or people who can do that. Yeah, it does take more overhead, but if you can do it, then it's really helpful. Yeah, exactly. You gotta if you're gonna do stand ups, you gotta do them right. And with our team, we were like, we're not gonna put in that effort, so we just don't do them at all. Which I think it's you either gotta do them right or don't do them at all. Deep Element says, I'm so shy to stream on cam, but I really want to try it again for game dev and art. You absolutely can, Deep. If you look back at my oldest streams that I have on YouTube, I didn't have a cam for like a couple months. I didn't use a cam at all. I just used a microphone. Um, I was on a really crappy laptop, and I mean, but that didn't stop me from streaming. So yeah, you don't have to have a webcam to stream. A lot of folks don't. Um, and yeah, I didn't have one for a long time. So don't let that limit you. There's a lot of tools out there that can help you, get started really easily, like Twitch Studio. Um, it's like kind of an out of the box streaming solution, works with Twitch. It's less flexible than something like OBS, but for a beginner, like I would recommend it. I'm actually still using Twitch Studio and it works fine for me. I'm not trying to be super fancy. I don't need a lot of animations or, crazy stuff. So I just use that. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the most important things about streaming is to acknowledge the chat. Because if chat is posting stuff and you're not acknowledging it at all, you don't have to acknowledge it immediately. As Quad Chat said, you can read chat after you're done doing the thing that you're doing, but just acknowledge them and respond to what they're saying, and that's how you build an audience. Yeah, and some people use avatars, right? You got those VTubers and stuff like that. Um, yeah, a lot of folks will use avatars or like motion capture stuff to hide their identity. Perfectly fine too. And there's out of the box stuff you can install for that. Okay, folks, we're gonna go ahead and find somebody to raid. I think I gotta go get flu shot and COVID shot, and hopefully be able to get out of bed tomorrow. But we'll see. Um, have a good rhythm. Well, it comes with practice. You're not gonna be perfect right away. Um, you know, like with all these things, you're not gonna be I don't know. You're not gonna be just the best streamer ever immediately. You're gonna figure out what works and what doesn't. Um, and yeah, just be I don't know, just be authentic, but be yourself, but be your best self, I guess, on stream. And yeah, you'll probably be fine. Acknowledge your chat, establish a back and forth, and yeah, you'll be fine. Thanks. All right, let's find somebody to raid, shall we? Sure, we got some good folks on this evening. As always, I'm open suggestions. I prefer folks who are in the software and game dev space. Um, Oh, thanks, folks. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah, software and game dev is preferred, preferably someone who's actually doing some dev work. They might be in the category, but yeah, maybe they're gaming or something like that. You know, but we'll just see who's online today. John Romero says he's doing game dev, but I think he's just playing Doom. Really? Oh my goodness. I don't know if I want to give John Romero an audience, honestly. Be yourself, but not as awkward. Well, the thing is, the awkwardness will slowly dissipate the more you practice, just like with anything else. Oh, Helkiana. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go over to the raid here. We'll see. looking. Oh, we got some choices. All right. Oh, let's look at yeah, Kunja, it's good to have you here. Please do come back next week. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll check them out. We've also got Morale Per. There looks like they're doing some dev work. Schorchenheimer's doing dev work. Manny Moki's doing dev. No worries, Leo. Good to see you. All right, let's check out. Yeah, we can check out Helkiana. Helkiana. Oh, there we go. Yeah, yeah. You can absolutely push to GitHub in Visual Studio. Yep, it's all integrated. That's which is pretty nice. Oh yeah, so they're playing Arc right now. But if they are a developer, we can go. Yeah, we can go ahead and raid Helkiana. Sure. So if you give them a follow, you can always catch them when they're actually doing dev work another time. And yeah, I think they've got the smallest audience of anybody we've looked at so far. So let's go ahead and give them a little boost, give them some love, and yeah, show them. Remember, be positive interactions with whoever we raid, and give them a good impression of our community. Oh, cool. Okay, she's a full-time dev. That's awesome. Let's do it. Alrighty. Have a great week, folks. See you all again soon. Bye bye. Raid is starting now. All right, 10 seconds, folks. No worries, Layla. Great to see you. 3, 2, 1. Bye.